Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. That is Ryan Roberts. I'm Brian Driscoll. We're going to get right to it. Ryan, today we're going to talk defense. And we're going to talk about the Notre Dame defense because we are going through this week, this first couple days of the week, I should say, when we're really looking at Notre Dame. And what does Notre Dame need to do to fix this? Because we have said a lot of times, Ryan, especially over the last several months, is this isn't really about the opponents. This is about Notre Dame. Notre Dame did not lose to Marshall because of Marshall per se. Marshall coached a great game. Their players played hard. Their players played well. But that was more about Notre Dame not playing well than it was Marshall. And so that's got to get fixed first. And the same thing is going to be true of Cal. If Notre Dame loses to Cal, it will not be a lack of talent compared to Cal. It will not be Cal coming out with these great game plans and all these type of things. Cal is who they are. This is about Notre Dame coming out and playing to their level and the things they need to do. And yesterday we talked a lot about the offense, and right now the offense needs a ton of work. The defense does as well. Now the defense has certainly played better. I think the defense played very well in the opener, took a big step back against Marshall, in my opinion. Big step back in a lot of different ways. And so we're going to talk about some of the things that we have seen in the first two games that I think manifested themselves even more in game two that need to get looked at, need to get fixed and corrected. And some of the things we really didn't know if they were not going to be a problem. Some things we did not expect to be issues that we're going to have to address now and get fixed. And so that will be the purpose of today's show. Because, Ryan, at the end of the day, yes, the defense has had a chance, has played well enough to give the team a chance to win two games as the offense was better. But if they had won those two games, Notre Dame to be 2-0, but there'd still be the same holes. And if the offense was better, there'd still be the same holes on the defense that, could prove problematic against teams like North Carolina and BYU and Clemson and especially USC at the end of the year. So these things got to get cleaned up. Win or lose, they got to get cleaned up. But as much as we want to put the blame on the offense, the reality is the defense has also had multiple opportunities to make fourth quarter stops, and in each instance gave up 95-plus yard touchdown drives. Yep. That's not the offense's fault. No. And so we've got to address that, and we're going to talk about what are some of those things that can get fixed today is what we'll discuss and what we'll focus on. So, Ryan, I think the first one, and this is more of a big picture look at the team. I really can't put my finger on why, but right now the stars are not playing like stars. And, Brandon Marshall did in the opener. He had some flashes in game two, didn't play overly well in game two, in my opinion. Isaiah Foskey has been, for the most part, not a factor in games. Jason Adamiola had a big play late against Marshall, but other than that, hasn't made a lot of plays. Maris Luafau has been, disappointing, I think is a way to put that, to be nice.
Underwhelming,
from what we kind of expected him to be. Yep. And Cam Hart, and again, you and I both talked about this before the show. We understand he's battling a hamstring injury. I'm sure that's a factor, but whatever the reason, he hasn't been all that good either. Yep. And so the first thing is we can talk about all the scheme and all the coaching changes that need to get made, and there are some. But the biggest thing that is needed on defense is the stars got to look in the mirror and say, what am I doing? And not pointing the finger at the coach is doing this or this person's doing that or whatever the case may be. It's look in the mirror and say, what do I have to do to get better? Because the biggest thing is if Isaiah Foskey and Jason Adamiola and Cam Hart simply get back to the level they played at last year, this defense gets much better immediately.
Well, Brian, before the show started, we were talking a little bit about what is Isaiah Foskey doing differently that he's not as dominant as he was just last season? And I can't put a finger on it. I really can't. I mean, I don't know what the issue is because I don't know. I don't know if you noticed it, Brian, but I haven't noticed a ton of slide protection going right to 7 or double teams for the most part, Isaiah Foskey getting one-on-one opportunities. And for whatever reason, He's not capitalizing. And that goes to Jason Adamalola not capitalizing. That goes to Maris Loifel not capitalizing. That goes to Cam Hart. It's not like I haven't noticed these dramatic shifts from an offensive perspective where they're saying, like, we need to eliminate these guys and have them so that they are not affecting us at a high rate. I haven't noticed those things. For whatever reason, so far, they're not playing well. And I don't know what
Cincinnati
it is.
did that to Foskey last year, Ryan. You could point to it and say they were sliding, they were chipping, they were doing a lot of things to him to slow him down. You can't point to that this year and say, oh, this is why. You can't. It's not there.
It's not there. It's not. And it's troubling because, like, we talked about it, right? Ohio State has a couple of talented offensive tackles. Like, it's not acceptable, but you kind of understand it a little bit more because you're like, okay, at least he's playing good football players against Marshall. Like, I like Ethan Driscoll, but there should be no chance that a one-on-one situation Isaiah Foskey doesn't win, right? Like, that's where the frustration comes. Yes.
Consistently doesn't win. And that's a problem. I mean, that's a concern. Same with Jason Adamula. Now, some of it is going to be usage, and we're going to talk about those things. But those guys, and here's the big thing is this is the biggest thing on defense is where's the leadership, right? And what are they going to do about the 0-2 loss? Are they going to say, well, this guy's not doing what Coach Elston did? Okay, fine. This guy, we're running this, and Coach Freeman liked to run this scheme last year, and we're not doing that anymore. We're now doing this scheme or whatever. And it's like, okay, fine. But are you playing to the best of your potential within that system? If the answer is yes, then you need to go to the coach and say, Coach, listen, here's the deal. I feel like this is, I'm not able to get into a rhythm because of this. I'm having trouble executing this because of this. But if you can't look in the mirror and say, I'm giving everything I got and I'm doing everything I can within that system and buying into what they're doing, then you're part of the problem. You've got to correct it, right? So these are good kids. They're hard workers. I don't question any of that, but they've got to start playing better. It's as simple as that. And it's not about coaching. There are coaching things to correct, but it's not just about coaching. It's about you guys have got to step up and do what you're capable of doing. And that's going to be a big part of this and then that leading by example then makes everything else better, Ryan. And that's where, when you come down to it, if what was one of the things we literally did 2 whole shows on this during the summer. If this team is going to reach its potential, your stars got to play like stars. And so far this season, outside of Michael Mayer, I can't think of a single star that has played like a star in both games. And even Michael Mayer is not blocking like hardly all that effective. He's like taking a step back there. So that's the big thing. They got to do it. They got to do it.
Brian, I felt like in the summer we talked a lot about just kind of the defensive, I guess, floor to it, right? Because, I mean, again, Cam Hart was a good player last year. Isaiah Foskey was a really good player last year. I thought Jason Malola at times was a really, really good football player last year. And you just kind of assume that that's the baseline, right? Like, that's if you're going to get what you got last year at worst and it doesn't improve upon itself, then you still have a chance to be a really good defense. But for whatever reason, you aren't getting that baseline right now. And I don't know if it's a change of scheme. I don't know if it's not maximizing player strengths. Like, I don't know what it is 100%. I don't know if defensive players aren't fully locked in. I don't know. I can't really explain it. All I know is it has to change. It has to change because there's a lot of, I mean, honestly, like Brandon Joseph was a little bit of an unknown. We expect him to be a really good player because he was at Northwestern, but he's coming here. And I think through 2 games, like you said, his Marshall game wasn't quite as good as his Ohio State game, but he's probably been their best defensive player, maybe. I mean, not probably arguably in the top 2 or 3. Tariq Bracy has taken a big step forward, which is nice to see. But the guys that you were just kind of expecting to be the dudes based upon what you saw in 2021 just aren't those dudes right now. And the talent is all there. And I mean, if we're talking, not to be too critical, but Isaiah Foskey and Jason Adamalola both came back to school. Why, Brian? Because they had stuff that they had to prove, right? They had a jump that they needed to take. And right now they haven't taken it. So I hope the last 10, hopefully more games of the season, they're able to take that step. And it's going to be very important for this team overall on defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and I'm going to push back on this question for this comment from Bill Walsh. It says Foskey has had 52 tackles last year. That is 4 per game. I know that he was disruptive. He has 9 through 2 games this season. Okay, a couple responses to this, Bill. Number one is, so he has 5 solo tackles, which is about 2.5 per game. Last year, he averaged about almost 3 solo tackles per game, so that's below his normal average. Has 1 tackle for loss and 1 sack, and I don't believe he was touched on that play. So, yes, his tackles are basically on par with last year. His tackle for loss and sack projections are cut in half, basically compared to last year. And that includes going against Marshall. So, that number doesn't mean a whole lot to me. Plus, it's not about, I've said this a million times, it's not about sacks. I've said this a million times. It's about constant disruption. And the reality is his disruption has just not been there. And that's a fact. I mean, you go look at last year and you can talk about, what he did last year. And okay, let's talk about what he did last year. Last year, Isaiah Foskey had, I'm going to pull the numbers up now. Okay. So last year, Isaiah Foskey in 13 games had 54. Let me see here. Let me look at his total hurries last year. Isaiah Foskey had 32 total hurries. So that's about, 32 total pressures, excuse me. So that's about 2.5 per game. Per game, he has 2 this year. So he has a hit and a sack on a quarterback, no hurries, according to Pro Football Focus. And I can't disagree with him because I don't have him down for any pressures at all either. So he's got to play better. This isn't a shot at him. He's capable of playing a lot better. Yes. He needs to play a lot better, right? Same with Jason Adamiola, same with Cam Hart. And look, some of the guys that we had question marks about have played pretty solid football so far. Mm-hmm. And what kills me is you'll see people harder on Riley Mills, who's been a far more productive player so far than Isaiah Foskey, and not be as hard on Isaiah Foskey. And the reality is Isaiah Foskey is a first-round talent, and he is I believe, a team captain. He's got to step up and play well. And so those are things that we need to see. Your stars have to play like stars. That's the first thing, because we have seen in the past that stars playing like stars overcome coaching issues offensively and defensively. And so unless you're looking in the mirror and saying, I'm doing everything I can, then that's what your focus needs to be on. When you get to that point, then you can sit down and have a conversation with the coach about, hey, this is something that's got to change, or this has got to be better. And so I think that for me is the first thing that I'm going to point to.
Brian, I would just reiterate, I think just watching the first 2 games, if we're just talking about Foskey for a second, I mean, like, all due respect to him, because I think he's a top 20 pick talent in next year's draft, like just from a talent perspective. I mean, 6'5", 260, long arms, athletic. Like, he has all the tools, there's no doubt. But against Ohio State, he was invisible. Let's be honest. Like, he was invisible against Ohio State. And then Marshall, he has the 1 sack where I'm pretty sure it was run action away and he was unblocked, right? I'm pretty sure that was the play. And then he had 1 decent outside track rush on Ethan Driscoll where he wasn't able to finish, right? So they haven't been productive. I mean, I could argue also that Howard Cross has probably been the best interior defensive lineman on the team through 2 games. But I guess it's,
that's not an argument, Ryan. That's a fact.
Yeah.
I mean, Howard Cross has been by far their most, and the difference is he's consistently effective.
Yes.
Right. Like, Howard Cross doesn't have a ton of tackles for loss. He doesn't have a ton of sacks on the season, right? He's got 1.5 tackles for loss. He's got 1 sack, and he got that, I believe, on the first play of the season. It's the constant disruption, right? The constant penetration. I think he has played well. So again, it's if your stars simply step up and play to their potential, this thing gets better. And so that's obviously an area that they have to look at. That's step 1.
Yep.
Step 2, Ryan, as the coaching staff has to kind of look at what they're doing and say, okay, what are we doing that contributes to the fact that multiple of our best players are not playing to their potential? And this is what we say. It's always got to be both. It can't just be the players saying they have to look in the mirror, and then the coach is like, yeah, you're right, you should look in the mirror. No, they need to look in the mirror, and you need to look in the mirror. Why is it that Jason Adamiola, Isaiah Foskey, Justin Adamiola, Cam Hart are all playing less effectively than they did a year ago? That's got to be something as a coach you got to look in the mirror and ask yourself. And so, like, people say, well, Blake Fisher, Tommy Reese talked about this yesterday. Blake Fisher hasn't played a lot of games. Okay, I get that, but he didn't play a lot of games going into the Oklahoma State game, and his pass protection looked a lot better than it does right now in games 3 and 4. So, why is there regression? Joe Walt has looked worse in 2 games this year than he did at any point in time, in my opinion, last year. Why is that? Well, against Ohio State, you could chalk it up to win against talented guys, but what's the excuse against Marshall? Right. And so now I thought Joe played better against Marshall than he did against Ohio State. He was, in my opinion, their best offensive lineman against Marshall, but he wasn't as good as he could be and should be, and as well as he played at times last year. So I think defensively, you have to look in the mirror and say, as coaches, and say, why is this happening? Is it a preparation thing? Are we asking too much of them now that the season's in? Are they playing too much in practice? Are we giving them too many reps? Did we wear them down a little bit? That's a question you have to ask. I don't know the answer to that because we're not a practice. Right? These are just general things that you have to ask yourself. Are we not practicing them enough? Are they not getting enough reps? Again, we don't know the answer to that because we're not at practice, but these are things you have to ask yourself. And one of the things that I think is true, Ryan, is I think that they're asking a lot of the players from a standpoint of how much they have in. And we saw this last year from the defense early last year, where they put a lot in early and the defense struggled for the first, several games of the season. And then they figured it out. Well, you were able to get away with that last year because you played two not very good teams in your first two games of the year. And were able to win late because you had a veteran quarterback and because you had way better players than them. Well, this year you're playing two better teams than you did last year, and you're 0-2.
Yep.
And so I think one of the big things that, as you and I look at what they need to do, one of the big things that the coaching staff needs to do, like right now, is they have to do a better job, in my opinion, of scaling back what they're asking these guys to do. And I think this is a common mistake that we see at Notre Dame. And we'll kind of go through big picture what we think they need to do and then how it affects each position group. And so for me, they have to kind of figure out with a defensive line. Like one of the things I didn't understand about Saturday against Marshall is they ran a lot of 3-down stuff.
Yeah.
Which I didn't quite understand. And then they're putting Justin Adamiel like at Mike.
A lot. It seemed like a lot to me.
Yeah. My understanding is that's not the plan they went into the week with. They changed course at some point in time during the week to get to that. And I didn't quite understand that. And so I think, first of all, Ryan, look, the D-line's not really playing that well as a whole. They've taken a step back. Why?
Yep.
The linebackers are being passive unless they're being forced to attack with a run stunt. Why? Your corners at times, especially Cam Hart to the field, is a little slow to react to things. You saw the two slant routes he got beat on. Notre Dame forced a 3-and-out, 4-and-out on the first drive of the game, 3-and-out. Cam Hart got beat on both of those plays. Quarterback just missed.
Yep.
And so, they ended up hitting those and eventually started getting plays on him. And he was flat-footing. He was slow to react. So I'm not seeing a unit in week 2 that looked as aggressive, as quick to react in week 1, which raises the question of why. And those are all questions that the coaching staff needs to ask themselves as to what their role is in these things being realities. And that's the biggest thing, Ryan, is if they're not willing to do that, then that's going to change. If they are willing to do that, and I think that they are, then I think you'll start finding some answers on, okay, what are we doing here? Is it a personnel thing? I don't really think it is. Is it to a degree, is it a preparation thing? Are they uncertain of what the other team is doing? Like, are we as a coaching staff not doing enough in the film room to prepare them to what they're going to see? Or are we asking so much of them on our end that they're paralysis by analysis or they're getting confused? Because we saw things on Saturday, Ryan, that Marshall saw something in the film against Ohio State that made them say, we can kill them in the flats all game long. And they did.
Yeah.
With simple things like going in motion and running an under route and knowing that Notre Dame's going to, try and, are they going to pass that off? And then they were late. You got Xavier Watts stepping down and they're running outside of them. You've got Ramon Henderson not getting outside. You had the one play where Ramon Henderson and Maris Lufau on 3rd and 9 are looking in the backfield as a guy runs an under route right through them to get wide open. Clearly, whatever you're doing in practice as a coach isn't clicking.
Yeah.
And at least it was this week. Now, you can put a complex scheme in when you have a whole offseason to prepare for it. But can you do that when you've got 3 or 4 practices? Clearly, at least for 1 week, you didn't. So you got to ask yourself, was it a bad week? Or is there a structural problem that we need to fix to make sure this doesn't happen again?
It has to be a complexity issue because it seems like everyone's just everyone's moving a little slow, if I'm being honest. Like we talked about this on the show yesterday, and I think that it's the same type of thing here, Brian. Like I think that it's something where you don't have to overthink it. I mean, against Ohio State, I literally had a person that covers Ohio State text me and say, like, wow, well, Notre Dame's cornerbacks, they just absolutely smothered the Ohio State wide receivers.
Yeah.
We haven't seen people get that physical with Ohio State's corners. You're like, wow, that's a great sign. But in the game number 2, I felt like there was no aggressiveness in that regard,
Right.
Brian. And I don't understand that one, especially because I wasn't worried about Marshall's wide receivers getting on top of Notre Dame's corners. Like, I'm not worried about that. Why are we not being more aggressive? Like, you can take chances, in my opinion. And defensive line wise, why are we doing, I don't want to call it exotic because I wouldn't say it's exotic, but a 3-man front with Tuck and Justin Adamalola as a stacked player. Like, I don't understand. Why are we not just staying in a 4-man front and taking the shackles off and letting them go, man? Right. Why are you not letting Maris Loifau just play with his hair on fire? Like, there's so many things where I'm just like, are they? I feel like there's an overcomplicated nature to this defense right now. I do. I really do. Because I think that one thing that we came into the year, and we saw it in the spring and in the fall for the availability we had, Notre Dame looked fast on defense, man. Like, they were moving.
Yeah.
In this game especially, and a little bit against Ohio State at points, Notre Dame didn't look fast. Like, they don't look fast. And I
thought they looked fast on the second level against Ohio State. Or third level. I thought they looked passive on the – because we talked about the linebackers looking passive in the first game.
Yeah.
And we saw it again this game. And that should not be the case for Maris Loifau and J.D. Bertrand. It should not be the case.
Should not be.
And so, yes, I think that you're right. This is now 2 games in a row that we have seen that kind of – and again, it's knowing the difference. And an analyst that you should listen to is someone who should know the difference between someone being slow and someone running slow. And I'm going to say that every single day that we have this conversation when I'm hearing people talk about Notre Dame has an athleticism problem.
No,
they don't, because that was not their issue last year. And it's the same guys basically as they had last year.
Maris Loifau is fast. Cam Hart is fast. Isaiah Foskey is fast. All these guys are fast players. That's why it's confusing why they don't look fast right now.
Right. So I think when you look at it, Ryan, the first thing that I look at defensively is I think the linebackers especially, they have to figure out why they're playing so passively. Is it what they're asking them to do? And then, because here's a concern. I'm just throwing this out there. In the NFL, when you have professional athletes who are grown men and have been in the NFL for a few years, you can say, hey, look, we can have you react later because you have the size, strength, and technique that you need to know how to play the angles and still force things back inside. You can't ask that of college linebackers, in my opinion, unless they're freaks. And so if they're asking them to do that, that needs to change, right? And identify the run, get your read key, and go. And that's something I wonder too that makes me think there's a complexity problems. I don't know if they know what if they're getting good feel on the read keys, because there was a play on Saturday where it was an inside zone run and they ran like a wing back across to block to the backside, and Jack Kaiser runs right past the running back chasing the tight end across the field.
Yep.
It was a clear run. It was clear. He was clearly going backside to block, and he's chasing him across like he's covering him in man defense. And you're like, that's clearly a senior who's played a lot of football who couldn't decipher that this was an inside zone run. And if he steps right into the hole and squeezes down, he's right there to take it. And so I don't know if that was what he was asked to do or what he just made a mistake. I don't know the answer, but I know that a kid like Jack Kaiser should not be making that mistake. And it's one of those things where I could sit here and hammer Jack Kaiser for that, and we saw that a few times, or I could say, if Jack Kaiser's making that mistake, that's got to tell you something. It's one thing for Maris to make mistakes because he hasn't played a lot of football. But when you're seeing Jack Kaiser make those kind of mistakes, that raises a red flag for me that's saying, hey, I think there's a chance you're asking these guys to do a little bit too much. Too much thinking, not enough reacting. Because the linebackers have been this was expected to be a better unit this year.
Yep.
Not only have they not been better than last year, they've been worse than last year, in my opinion, Ryan. Their play has gone down. And you got the same guys as last year, basically, except Drew White, and you've added Maris Loifau.
Yeah.
That's concerning to me, and that's why I say, yes, the players need to look in a mirror, but there's more to it than that, in my opinion. And I'll be honest, I don't quite know what the answer is. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that it's a problem that's got to be addressed, and I don't know if it's schematically, meaning scale things back, or if it's schematically meaning being more aggressive with your run stunts. Hit your linebackers, use your gaps, because what they were doing Saturday was, and it happened by my count at least 7 or 8 times, is the 2 interior linemen would vacate the A gaps
Mm-hmm.
And then the linebackers would just stand there and let blockers get up to them and block them.
Yep.
Now, clearly that's not how they were taught to do it. But for whatever reason, whether one of the defensive linemen messed up, whether one of the linebackers was supposed to crash one of the A gaps, I don't know the answer to that. But when that's happening over and over and over, and Marshall is just like running 5, 6, 7 yards with ease, Ryan, that's a preparation problem, in my opinion, because your guys are not executing effectively. And that tells me that you didn't do a good enough job getting them ready to play. And that's something that's got to get better. And I don't know how to fix that. I do know, however, it's got to get fixed, because if your linebackers keep playing anything close to what they've done the first 2 games, this is not getting fixed. I don't care what the defensive line does.
There's just so much miscommunication. I mean, we were texting during the game about this, man. Like, we were talking, in large part about, some of the stuff in the secondary as well. But I mean, the biggest miscommunication I saw throughout the game was, to your point, I saw guys in the same gap a lot, Ton, right?
Yeah.
And Notre Dame is a one-gap defense. They're a one-gap defense, which means every player is designed to occupy a gap. And for whatever reason, there were times a lot throughout this game where Howard Cross or whoever the other defensive tackle was would slant outside from the A gap, being now a B gap player. And for whatever reason, the linebacker was still acting like he was responsible for that B gap. So you have 2 guys occupying one gap, which means there's a gap left wide open. I don't know why. I also mentioned Jack Kaiser at one point, Brian, like he took like a 45-degree drop. It was an inside zone play where he was tucked. It was against like 12 personnel. I'm like, Jack, you're a run first player inside the box, right, man. Like, I don't get it. Like,
it's like he's trying to play rover in the will alignment. I mean,
exactly. It was weird. And
we're going to get to that here in a second as well.
Yeah, because he's stacked. He's tucked inside the tackle box. I'm just like, I don't understand what the key is here. I don't understand what the read. I mean, usually, like you mentioned, like the cross action on the zone, right? Like usually, I mean, linebackers are run first players, right? So like you diagnose run, you fill your gap. The cross stuff doesn't happen until you've kind of have been like, oh snap, it's a pass play. Like I need to redirect here in space now and occupy the pass. Like linebackers are run first players. So I think that there is a lot of miscommunication right now, especially on the second level. Gap integrity, reading keys, everything just seems a little jumbled right now. And I'm not sure why that is. I'm really not, because I haven't noticed anything on defense that I'm like, this is over complexed, but I don't know, man. It's just, it's very odd right now.
What can happen is, Ryan, is when you're asking guys to this is what the issue with Brian Van Gorder was. And I am not comparing out Golden to Brian Van Gorder. We're 2 games in. I'm just simply making the point. It wasn't so much that they had a million different things. It's that the slightest little movement from the offense could result in massive changes of what they're supposed to do. So, hey, this is called, and if they do this, or this, it all changes what you're going to do. That's a lot for these guys to be able to do, to look at and do. And it a lot of times being passive comes from not so much that they're running a million different schemes, but they have a million different checks that they got to go through in their head to make sure that they know what they're doing. And so, I think to me, that's something that I want to see fixed and see corrected is maybe scale some of that back. And again, these are things that we're talking about that we think can be problems. I don't know the specific play calls. I don't know the specific coverage checks. What I do know is, as I've done this a long time, and when I was an offensive coach and I would break down film, when I'd see linebackers playing the way that Notre Dame's are, I'd say these guys are not confident in what they're doing. And I all of a sudden thought of like 10 different things we could do to get these guys thinking, because if we get linebackers thinking, we're going to rip them apart. With run game, with quick game, with screen game, with play action will kill them because they're not going to have a clue what's going on. Motions and shifts are going to kill them because they're going to be communicating as we're snapping the ball. You start seeing that as an offensive coach, you start salivating because you know why they're playing that way. They're either soft or they're being passive because they're uncertain of what they're doing. I don't think a single one of those Notre Dame linebackers are soft. I don't. And anyone that thinks they are, I'd love for you to meet any single one of them in an alley one time and call them that to their face. They're not soft. They're playing passive. And that's the difference. And they're playing passive because there's a lot going on up here. And as I said in an article this week, if your mind can't go fast, then your legs can't go fast. right? And if your mind is having trouble figuring things out, then your legs are going to have trouble figuring things out. And that's what we're seeing at linebacker, especially. And to me, that's arguably the biggest problem that Notre Dame has right now, has just been the subpar play of their linebackers. And yeah, their defensive line has not played well, but there's plenty of times the defensive line kind of did their job, didn't do it great, but they did their job, and the linebackers are nowhere to be found. Because when there's 5 blockers and only 4 D linemen, especially if you're doing a thing where there's a lot of times it doesn't look like they're being used to penetrate and make a play. And, I'd like to see more of that, but the linebacker play's got to get better. It's got to get a lot better. And the coach has got to figure out, what are we doing to making them play this way?
Right.
And if it's not you, then you need to find somebody else to play. And hopefully the coaches don't have that reaction, because when it's happening across the board to veterans, that's as much of a you problem as it is a them problem. And matter of fact, I'd argue, Ryan, it's more of a you problem as a coach than it is a them problem. I've always believed this, Ryan. When one of your players is not doing something as a coach, or maybe 2, you can look at them and say, hey, why are those 2 kids not doing what everybody else is doing? And you can look at it and say, this is a player problem. Now I got to figure out a way to address this player problem. When it is happening across the board at your position, that is 100% a coach problem, because whatever you think you're teaching is not clicking in their head. And I've used this example in the past. If you are a advanced calculus professor at Notre Dame and you're trying to teach a bunch of 9th graders calculus the same way you do your seniors at Notre Dame, guess what? Those 8th graders or 9th graders in high school are not going to have a clue what the heck you're talking about, right? So you've got to be able to teach in a way, no matter how smart you are, you've got to be able to teach in a way that your players can then take what you're teaching them and then apply it. Right. And it's no different in football than it is in teaching in regard to tests and projects and things like that. You could be smart as heck, but if your players can't learn and absorb and then carry out what you're teaching them, then the problem is you.
Yep.
If it's across the board. And that's why I say that I think from a linebacker standpoint that this is more of a coaching problem than it is necessarily a personnel problem.
It's a self-evaluation opportunity, right? And I mean, honestly, Brian, like, I was always told that you always look at yourself first, right? Like, you don't look around and blame others, right? So I have to think Al Golden's been coaching a long time, right? He's been coaching a long time. And I'm sure that he's looking around and saying, what do I need to do differently to get a better result defensively, consistently? And I have to believe that's where this is going right now. So if that is, I know you hate the word simplifying, but if that is simplifying the defense a little bit.
I hate the way that it's perceived.
Yes.
Like, I feel like simplify, people like, oh, simplification, it's just an overused term.
Yeah.
Kind of like, oh, you just got to simplify. Well, what do you want to do? Run like 2 calls, right? It's more about scaling. That's why I've kind of gone with the term scale back. Yep. Scale back the volume of what you're implying. Because I just feel like simplification simplify things has kind of become like this generic term that people use when they don't know specifically what to say. Well, you just got to simplify things. You know what I mean? It's like a cliche now. And that's why I hate it, even though scaling back is simplifying. I mean, it's the same thing, but I just feel like when you use that word, it automatically has, it just drives me nuts the way that it gets used.
Well, as a former math teacher, yes, I can agree that scaling down and simplifying are the same thing. So yes. Sorry. It's
the same thing, but funny. When you say it,
yeah,
like that's my thing. It's not
connotation to
yeah,
it.
It's just like, and it's something that like everybody uses now. Like, oh, you got to simplify. Okay. How? What does that mean? You know what I mean? Well, you just got to simplify. Okay.
Well, some analysts keep it broad.
Yeah, they ran 3 plays on Saturday. How much more simplified can you get? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I just feel like it's just a generic term that people have adopted on. Maybe I'm just being a little too sensitive to what's said on message boards and Twitters and all this kind of stuff. That there's just these buzzwords that people hear, and then they start using whenever something's not going right. Oh, it's a simplify, or they got to do this, you got to do that. It's like, well, you don't really know what that means, and you're not really using that correctly. And so that's more of what it is. But yes, please continue, Ryan. Because it is a simplification. It is.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, whether you want to call it simplifying or scaling down, I agree that I think that the defense moving forward needs to accentuate the player's strengths, and they need to get them going, honestly, right? I mean, we talked a lot yesterday about getting Drew Pine in rhythm early, right, in this fall game against Cal. Notre Dame needs to get a couple of their studs in rhythm, if I'm being honest, defensively, man. Like, they need to get Isaiah Foskey going. You need to get Jason Adamalola a opportunity to get a one-on-one in some situations. You need to get Maris Loifau getting downhill and being a little bit quicker of a processor for the role that he's playing. So I think just overall across the board, this is a game where you need to see growth. But in order for there to be growth, I think there's a rhythm that needs to kind of be struck defensively, right? Like that my main priority on defense, if I was Al Golden and the rest of the staff, is, hey, we know that we have these guys that are dudes, in our opinion, that are extremely talented. We need to get them going, right? So how do we get them going? Do we have movement up front? Do we just say, hey, screw it, we're going to go four fronts the whole game and just let the shackles go? Are we going to minimize the reads for a Maris Loifau so he plays a little bit faster so he doesn't have to think as much? Are you going to say, hey, Cam Hart, get in the guy's face and just play press man the majority of the snaps and just play your game? Whatever those little intricacies to how you play each of those positions happens, I'm open to it. At the end of the day, you need to get your guys, and we're going back. I mean, I just kind of coupled two things together, Brian, but I'm saying you need to simplify things most of all, in my opinion, for the stars that you have. So going back to the first point about getting your stars going again, I think that's where the simplification comes for, because if you let those guys not think as much, they're going to play faster. If they play faster, Isaiah Foskey is going to start making more plays. Maris Loifau is going to make more plays. Cam Hart's going to make more plays. They're all going to make more plays if you just ask them to not do as much, but do what they're doing well. Be comfortable with what you're doing.
Right. I think for the linebackers too, Ryan, one of the mistakes they made, and it made me cringe at the time, but I said, you know what? Clearly they see something, and you know exactly where I'm going to go with this. You know, okay, they're in practice. They must see it, is when they start talking about how they're cross-training all the linebackers.
Yeah.
And that was like, oh, okay, well, we'll see how that goes. And I think that's a problem too. They need to let Maris Loifau get good at playing Will first before they worry about him playing Mike or Rover. They need to let Jack Kaiser be really, really good at Rover first before they start playing him at Will and all these other positions. And same thing with J.D. Bertrand. They need to let these guys become masters of something first. And it's, you know, like they're not even jacks of all trades right now because they're doing so much. Like, they're not even that. Let them become masters of one thing first. Let them learn Will first.
Yeah.
And then figure out. And if you need somebody else to play Mike, then put your next Mike in the game. Or if you need somebody else to play Will, then put your next Will in the game. Let Prince Colley learn Will and let Maris learn Will. Let Jack Kaiser learn Rover and let Jalen Sneed learn Rover. You know, and same thing down along the line. So I think those things for me could also help with this, because now I don't have to learn the checks and the adjustments for three different positions. I can just learn them for one first. Then when you get that down, then you can do all those other things, because there is carryover from position to position of linebacker. But if you don't have the one mastered first, then you're just going to become kind of okay at all of them. And okay doesn't win you a lot of football games.
You know, it's funny that you mention it, because we haven't talked about this, but I remember I mentioned something to you briefly when the first depth chart came out before Ohio State. The fact that J.D. Bertrand was listed as the backup Rover and Jack Kaiser was listed as the backup Will, that worried me, man. And it really did at the time, because I was like, are we asking these guys to do a little too much? And I think that is what you're running into right now. Guys just have the wheels are turning too fast, man. The wheels are moving faster than what their feet are moving, right? Like that, you said that term already, like that little structure, right? So it is troubling, because because what has Notre Dame done really well in the recruiting trail the last two cycles now, right? Recruited the linebacker position. Right. Well, can we let some of those guys play a little bit? I'm not saying like take over starting spots. I'm saying, why don't we simplify again? Let's a couple guys be really good at Will, a couple guys be really good at Mike, a couple guys be really good at Rover, exactly what you just said. And we can, if we get to the point where Maris Loifau is such a good Will that you don't have to worry about him as much or learning the Will position, and then you could start kind of cross-training and accentuating even more of the strengths at a different position, then that's fine. But especially for a guy like him who, I mean, what did he have in 2020, Brian? He had like 20-something tackles, right? And then he missed 2021 with an injury. Right. Like, why are we worried about cross-training right now with a guy that you just need to get going? Like, he just needs to get going and comfortable with what he's doing. And there's not a lot of comfort right now on the second level.
And that's going to be a key here this week. How do they get that fixed? Because this got to get fixed quickly. So I think take a little bit off their plates from a playing different position standpoint. And we talked about this with the offense yesterday too. Is like, look, Lorenzo Styles is capable of playing all three receiver positions, and Jaden Thomas is as well. I think the mistake that we made is in our analysis is the same one that the coaches made. So I'm going to be fair to them. They thought that these kids could play different positions when in reality they're not. And so I think that's something that needs to get corrected is allow these kids to figure out what you're being asked to do first before you start doing other things. I think that's gonna be a big part of this, Ryan. So when
Yep.
you look at the defense, I think that's a big part of it. And I think that's leading to another problem, Ryan. When you look at this defense, is not making a lot of plays.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're making stops because teams aren't scoring.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, they're not giving up a lot of points. They gave up 19 points to Marshall. They gave up 21 points to Ohio State. That's not great, but that's good enough to be 2-0, Ryan. I mean, if you're giving up 19 and 21 points every game and your offense has a pulse, you're going to win, right? Well, they're not winning because their offense doesn't have a pulse right now.
Yeah.
But within that is there are some red flags for me that we're seeing from the defense that, okay, yeah, you're keeping teams down now, but as the offensive competition upticks a little bit and you don't have a whole month to prepare for some of these offenses like North Carolina and BYU and Clemson and USC, is what's it going to look like? And so when I look at Notre Dame's like disruptive numbers, they're concerning to me, Ryan. And like Notre Dame, for example, has yet to force a turnover in 2 games. And they just played a team, as we discussed last week in Marshall, that's terrible turning the ball over. Norfolk State forced a turnover from Marshall, and Notre Dame couldn't force a turnover from Marshall. That to me is really problematic. Is there's not a lot of disruption going on. A matter of fact, Norfolk State forced 2 turnovers. No, they only won. I was looking at the game. They forced 1 turnover, which is 1 more than what Notre Dame had. But when I look at these numbers, Ryan, I'm concerned because you look at Notre Dame, they're 74th in the nation in total tackles for loss. Look at sacks, they're 69th in sacks. They've got 4. You look at interceptions, they've yet to force an interception. You look at other things like pass breakups, they have had very, very few pass breakups this year. So Notre Dame right now in passes defense is tied for 127th with Syracuse, App State, Colorado, and Charlotte for last with 2 passes defense in 2 games. Now you could chalk it up in the opener like, CJ Stroud was putting the ball where it needed to be. You can't chalk it up to that against Marshall. It's Henry Colombi. Sorry.
Yeah.
A guy that has been a kind of a turnover machine in his career so far.
And a journeyman. There's a reason he's been at 3 different schools, right? I mean, yeah.
So that's problematic to me too. And again, I think a lot of that is because guys aren't playing as instinctively as they need to play, and they're not playing fast.
Yep.
And so the lack of disruption is another big red flag for me, that what you have to do is you have to be able to look past just the score of the first 2 games and say, well, defense did what they needed to do to win. Sort of, right? Because clearly they didn't, because they didn't win, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the defense has done enough to win, but did they do enough to earn the win? No, they didn't. And in both times, and here's why it's a red flag. In both games, when you needed to make a stop, you couldn't make a stop. Why? Because you're not disruptive. You can't force tackles for loss. You can't get sacks in clutch situations. You can't break up passes on 1st and 10. You can't force turnovers. So when you need a stop, you're not able to make stops. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, the offense has sucked the first 2 games. I mean, we've been pretty clear about that. But again, you had a 4th quarter lead and you lost it because you allowed them to go over 90 yards and score a touchdown. That's not the offense's fault. Now, should the offense have scored the previous drive to go up 22-12? Yeah, but you got the ball back with the lead and you gave up a 90-plus yard touchdown. That's not the offense's fault. That's yours. Offense was they were on the field too. It's Marshall. It's Marshall. Okay? So the defense is not doing what it needs to do, and it maybe it's good enough now, but it's not going to continue to be good enough if these problems persist. And they all sort of tie together to me, Ryan. The volume of what they're being asked to do schematically and formationally, is then leading to a lot of thinking and not a lot of playing. We're seeing guys not being aggressive. We're not seeing guys attacking. And what is that leading to, Ryan? A defense that's not overly disruptive. And you're going to need that quickly if you're going to get going. And here's the other thing. Where are you guys at in helping your offense get sparked? How about we not force the offense to go 85, 90 yards every time they get the ball, right? How about you don't allow the team to move and then eventually stop them? And then your offense is pinned back inside the 10, right? That's on you, right? Because you should have made a stop way back there at your own 15, right? I mean, you had 3rd and 9 inside the 10-yard line against Marshall on Saturday. It's not the offense's fault that they gave up the flats and allowed the easiest 3rd and 9 conversion in the history of college football. I'm being hyperbolic, but you get the point. That's not on the offense. You make a stop there, Marshall's punting, and you're giving your offense a chance again at midfield to get something going. Maybe they don't do something about it. Maybe they do. But if all you do is just make stops in the 4th quarter, you win the game. Yep. You didn't do it.
I think the key thing that I agree 100% on is the turnovers come when you're playing fast, right? Whether that is jumping a route, whether that is forcing a fumble from behind, whatever. The hustle usually kind of forces some turnovers at times. And it's a luck thing at points, but then it's also a skill to force turnovers, baiting a throw or playing until the whistle from the backside on plays and doing those types of things. So the previous point, I'm trying to really to combine points here because I think they are all interrelated. And the fact is if they're not confident in what they're doing, they're not going to play fast. And I think that's the reason why you haven't seen them be able to force turnovers or force big plays just in general, because they're not playing fast and they're all intertwined, right? Confidence leads to speed. Speed leads to making plays. Notre Dame's not making plays. Are they technically sound in a lot of instances? Yes, sure. I mean, against Ohio State, they were. Like, they didn't give up a ton of big plays against Ohio State. They kept everything in front of them. They tackled pretty well in that game for the most part until late in the until the 4th quarter. They started missing some tackles. Marshall, the missed tackles kind of shown its head a little bit more, but for the most part, they had guys that were in position. I just felt like it's such a passive position all the time, right? Like, it's not a position where you are dictating the speed of the game. Sure. You are reacting to the speed of the game. And that, I think, is the biggest difference right now is they're not playing fast. And until they're confident they're playing fast, they're not going to cause a bunch of plays. They're not going to force a bunch of plays.
I'm going to throw this at you, Ryan, and you tell me if you agree or disagree. I would argue that they haven't missed a ton of tackles, but my question would be, and this is a rhetorical question because I know you know the answer. Yep. Who have they played in the first 2 games that is a make-you-miss kind of player? They haven't really played one.
Nah.
So really. My concern is what happens when they play teams that do have those kind of athletes. Sure. North Carolina has some guys like that.
Josh Downs.
Clemson has some guys like that. USC has some guys like that. BC has a guy like that. Yep. So you're going to face some teams that have a little bit more make you miss than what we saw the first 2 games.
Yep.
And so that's my thing is I think part of the reason they haven't missed a lot of tackles is because these teams haven't had a lot of make you miss kind of guys. They had some really bad mistakes on Saturday. Right. And yeah. When they were put in clutch situation, they did have missed tackles, like on that long drive at the end of the game. So that's kind of my thing is I still see some red flags even in that regard, because you're seeing too many defenders, mainly. So you're seeing an issue with block destruction on the perimeter. And it was an issue against Ohio State, and it was still an issue against Marshall. You're seeing, like, there was a play, they ran a bubble screen and Ramon Henderson just gets sealed off outside. And it's just like, dude, you know what I'm seeing too, Ryan? There's a lot of stopping their feet on defense.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's why they're getting reached so easily. We talked about against Ohio State. It was the same thing there. It's part of the reason I think that Isaiah Foskey has not been effective. One of the things I've seen him do is kind of come off and hit guys and then kind of stop his feet. And so what he would normally do last year, which he would kind of rip his hips and then do the long arm and then drive a guy back. I'm not seeing that. That to me is a bit of a coaching problem. To me, because you're seeing when you see things across the board, it's a coaching problem. The reason that I'm not blaming Notre Dame's struggles on offense on a lineman or 2 and saying this is a coaching problem is because it's an across the board problem. The reason I'm not blaming Jayden Thomas alone for route issues or Braden Lindsey, or because we're seeing it across the board. Now, I am blaming individual players for their effort at times, like we talked about with Jayden on that interception. But when you're seeing guys stopping their feet across the board on the D-line, that's a coaching problem. When you're seeing linebackers as a whole play passively and just blow assignments, including veterans like Jack Kaiser, right? Who's, I think you and I would both agree, is a pretty smart football player that didn't have a lot of MAs last year, in my opinion. And to see him just completely whiff on a clear inside zone because he's chasing the guy across tells me that kid was not sure of what he was reading or how he was reading it. And when a kid like Jack Kaiser makes a play like that, Ryan, like warning signs start like screaming in my head. You know what I mean? Like air raid sirens are going off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, hold on a second. And so that's, to me, an issue, right? And we had a question, too, that somebody asked, and it's a fair question. But, again, I don't think it's necessarily the issue here. And I do want to pull this question up because it goes along with what we're talking about here. And Jeff DeMonk asks, and I appreciate this, Jeff. Brian, he says, Brian, when you mention complex defensive scheme, all I hear is Van Gorder. Yikes. And I can completely understand Jeff. And Jeff also gave us a super chat, which I really, really appreciate. And it was good to see you at the tailgate on Saturday, buddy. But here's a difference. And I completely understand why people would ask this question, Ryan. And so I think it's a very fair question. Brian Van Gorder's schemes were complex and unsound. I think Mike Elko's defense was complex and sound. I don't think the defense for Notre Dame is necessarily unsound when it's executed. So that's like John Tenuta's defense was complex and unsound.
Yes.
And Brent Venables' defense is complex but sound. And there's a difference. And I don't think that structurally I don't have really an issue with what Notre Dame is doing per se. There's a couple things that I would do differently from a game plan standpoint. Against Marshall, they should have been, and we'll get into some of these things because it's going to be true against Cal. It's going to be true against North Carolina. But structurally, I don't have an issue with the defensive philosophy or the play calls. It's the execution of them and why the execution isn't there. Because execution can be a player problem. Hey, I taught you what to do and you didn't do it. Execution can also be a coaching problem where you didn't do a good enough job teaching them and preparing them on how to execute there properly. Brian Van Gorder did both of those things wrong. He didn't teach them, and it was unsound. And that's what made his defense woefully bad. This is not that. This is also something that can be correctable like that, in my opinion. And so you just hope that they're going to do it, Ryan. That's the key. So that is the difference, and I want to make sure people understand, Ryan. This isn't a Brian Van Gorder era type of thing. And there's a difference there because the other thing is they hear NFL. And all of a sudden, it's like, not every NFL defensive coordinator is Brian Van Gorder, right? That was a Brian Van Gorder problem, not if you hired an NFL coach problem.
And Al Golden comes with a lot better resume than Brian Van Gorder came with, too. I mean, if we're being honest, like it's just
great point.
That's an apples to oranges type of thing, right? And look, I know people don't want to hear this, but sometimes there's a little bit of a transitional thing that takes a little bit of time. And I know, again, I don't think I did a good enough job of this in the summer of kind of saying like, hey, this may not be like a day one fix, right? Like this might take a couple games. I'll take the blame for that one. I don't think I did a good enough job of accepting that like, hey, this is a brand new coaching staff, brand new system, or not brand new, but different wrinkles to the system. And it might take a little bit for it to get implemented properly. Like that may have been.
I'm going to push back on you a little bit. Right? I think we should have done a better job. Like we would say things like we would talk about them like, well, now we need to see it. Well, now we need to see it was the warning part. We didn't do a good enough job, in my opinion, I'll be honest, of saying, if here's what will happen if this, here's what some of the dangers could be, right? And here's what some of the concerns should be. That's on us.
Yeah.
Now, what I will say, however, is I don't think that the adjustment should have been what it has been, because I still think that is on the coaching staff to say, don't start this way until they prove to you that they can be this way. Like we have two polar opposite things going on offense right now. Like the Notre Dame offensive coaches are like, well, we're not going to put a guy in there until we fully trust him entirely. And that's why Tobias Merriweather has 0 snaps, which is freaking absurd, by the way. And then on defense, it's kind of like, well, we're just throwing a lot at them and then throwing them out there and hoping that they figure it out kind of thing. But the problem is those, it's easier. And people say, well, did they not see it in practice? No, they didn't. Because in practice, things are so scripted that you can kind of convince yourself that, no, we got this. And I've always kind of felt like start with what you know and then build on it, right? I mean, that's my thing is figure out what you're good at and then get really good at that, then build on that. And I don't think that they necessarily did that, in my opinion. So we should have warned that was the danger of that. But I think here's the thing, if they would have done things that we're talking about a month ago, are we having the same problem after 2 games? I don't think so. And this
Probably
is
not.
also a defense that a week ago we were talking about how great they looked against Ohio State.
Yep.
Right? So this also could be a letdown game. But there's also enough red flags to say it can't just be as simple and as easy as saying letdown game, because there were some structural things that we saw that kind of permeated both games that are problematic and that need to get fixed. So the Van Gorder thing is fair. I love the fact that you want to take ownership of that, and we all need to do that, because again, we both predicted them to be a playoff team. They're clearly not, but what are the reasons why? And they should have known these things going in, and some of these things going in, some of these things you don't know, and this is what we've talked about before, because when you don't get to scrimmage anybody, you really don't know, and so you may think like, well, hey, we think we're pretty good. But it's because maybe you're not playing a team that's as good as you think that, in practice as they should be. Those type of things.
It's because in practice a lot, Brian, like, you're running team for, let's say, and someone does something wrong, you teach them up and run it again, right? Like you get a mulligan in practice. Like you don't get any mulligans during the game, like you don't get second chances. That's where it comes down to, right?
Calling plays against what you think you're going to see. And what Marcus Freeman has noted and what other coaches have noted is teams have shown us things that we haven't seen. Well, yeah. So every good coach is going to do. Like I would always try to find what can we do, like, because it's study your self-scouting yourself, studying yourself. We have a tendency, I really like running inside zone out of this. So I've got to be real intentional in my game planning and play calling to not always run inside zone out of the way that I like it the most, and figure out other ways to run it so teams don't get a read on us. And there's going to be things that I'm going to see in what you do that I'm going to say, hey, look, we don't really have this play in, but we need to get this play in because I see holes in what this team is doing. So we'll add a real simple fix or a real simple wrinkle to what we're doing to exploit you. So guess what? You're not going to have seen that on film. But that's not an excuse, because every team does that. And if your offense isn't doing that, then that's a problem with your offense. Not anything else, And so that is the danger of going against your softball camp, because you kind of, what your offense is going to do because you see it every single day. Well, Marshall did throw some wrinkles in their end that they weren't prepared for, but they should have been, and they should have been able to adjust quicker. And that's the other thing too, is they never adjust. Marshall knew for 60 minutes. Marshall knew when we need to get to the flats, we can. And Notre Dame never did anything to fix it. Now maybe they tried and it did get executed, which goes all the way back to point number one. Whatever you're doing, your kids aren't figuring out yet. And I think that's a unique problem to Notre Dame when you talk about the big time football, because I think coaches can get these Notre Dame kids and they are really smart.
Yes.
And they can really pick stuff up in practice, and they really can pick stuff up in the meeting room. And then they get the games and they're not able to handle it as well, because there's a big difference between me mentally being able to do something when I'm sitting there in the film room, or like you said, I made that mistake in practice, but I'll go out there and do it again. Or when there's just not the pressure of 80,000 people there in the crowd that you can do those things. And
do you think, from your experience, Brian, do you think that that's a coaching flaw at Notre Dame sometimes? Because not only just from I'm not talking about this staff specifically. I'm saying just in general, coaches come in and say, these are smart kids. They can handle it. I can throw anything at them and they can handle it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, I think part of that is just because a kid is smart academically doesn't mean he's smart in football. Like, I've known kids. I had a kid in high school that was a really, really smart kid. He's one of the dumbest people I've ever met in my life when it came to common sense. Like just an idiot. But he was really book smart. Just because you're book smart doesn't mean you're going to be football smart. And just because, I mean, you and I have known this, there are guys who can barely read and write who were phenomenal football players and they're Hall of Fame football players. We've heard these stories, right? Like,
wasn't Dexter Manley, right? Exactly. Yeah, Dexter Manley.
Like barely literate, but was a great football because he knew the game. He was smart in this area. You'll have guys that dropped out of high school in the 9th or 10th grade that are brilliant mechanics, and you trust no one else with your car because they have mastered their craft. They may not be good in English and whatever, but they're great in this, right? You have people that are great business owners that are great. They may own a mechanic shop, but they don't have the slightest clue on how to change oil. Why? Because they hire people that are good at that, but they know how to run a business.
Yep.
And so I think there's that can certainly happen. And I think these are smart kids, but you've got to, with anything, they didn't get to that part by jumping into advanced classes in the 6th grade. They eventually learned, and then their expertise kind of took over. So I do believe that is an issue that needs to be addressed, and we see it a lot. And you need to scale it back. Let them master this first, then go. Because to your point, Ryan, if the talent is what we think it is, and there's a lot of people saying, "Oh, you guys are all wrong on the talent," and all this other kind of stuff, and maybe, but that's a real easy, lazy excuse to make. Because again, you may say, "Well, maybe their talent's not good enough to play with Clemson or whatever." You outplayed Ohio State for over half the game, and you're telling me that talent wasn't good enough to beat Marshall? Or maybe the talent is there, but they're not playing well. And I could, when Ohio State, the last time Ohio State won a national title was what year? 2014, right? They struggled with Navy, who was not that good that year, beat them 34-17. It was an ugly game. Went out the next week and lost at home by 2 touchdowns to Virginia Tech, who went 7-6 that year. Did Ohio State have a talent problem? Or do they have a getting the most out of their talent problem? Well, that team went on to win the Big Ten championship 59-0, then beat Alabama, and then beat Oregon in the championship game 49-20. So what happened against Virginia Tech? Did they all of a sudden sub out all new players? Or were they just not, as a team, were not where they needed to be early on? USC in 2016 is a perfect example. As we've talked about them over the summer and in the past, when we've talked about, what is the one benefit of expanding the playoff, which I'm not a big fan of. You're going to have some teams like USC 2016 that are going to make the playoff and do damage. Why? That team started 1-3.
Yep.
They lost to Alabama 52-6. By the end of the year, that USC team could play with anybody. And why? Now they made some personnel changes that were already there. They went from Blake Barnett at quarterback to Sam was it Blake Barnett? No, who's the quarterback? No, it was Max Whittick, I think was the quarterback.
Max Brown? Or no, Max Whittick.
Was Max? It was Max Brown. It was Max Brown. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it was Max Brown. Because I think Max Whittick was already gone. But yeah, I think it was Max Brown. I'm going to go look it up now because that's going to bother me, even though it's not pertinent to the story.
Max Brown's the kid from Washington, right?
Correct. State. I'm pretty sure it was. Yes, it was Max Brown. Yes, okay. Max Brown. Max Whittick's last year at USC was 2013.
Wow, he was that long ago? Yeah. That's insane.
He played against Notre Dame in 2012.
Wow.
He was the quarterback for USC when they played Notre Dame in 2012. That's crazy. Yeah, it's Max Brown. But anyway, when those things get in my head, I just can't move on until I know the answer to that. But the point is they made the change at quarterback, but that change at quarterback wasn't the reason they all of a sudden looked good in defense, looked good on the offensive line. It was part of that team evolving and finally getting to its potential. They didn't have a talent problem when they lost to Utah early in the season. They didn't have a talent problem when they lost to Stanford. That was the same players, the same exact players on that football team that crushed Arizona State, that beat Colorado, who was really good that year, that destroyed Oregon, that went on the road and beat number 4 Washington, a playoff team, by 13 that year. They beat them by 13 in that game. They held Washington to 200. Look, this is what Washington did that season. So 480 total offense for Washington: 482, 407, 512, 424, 682 against Oregon, 519, 385, 704, 509, 539, 510, 383 against Bama, 194 against USC, 276, 17 rushing yards against USC. Right, that was a playoff team. And then also same thing on the other side of the ball. Their defense gave up over 400 yards that year twice. Once was to Oregon in a game that Washington won 70-21, and then in a loss to USC at home. And USC scored more points against them than Alabama did. That's the same team in USC, Ryan, that season got their butts kicked by Alabama 52-6, lost to Stanford 27-10, and then lost at Utah that year. Now, that Stanford team in 2016 was not a very good football team. Lost to Colorado 10-5. They went 10-3. They weren't that good. I mean, Notre Dame almost beat them that year, and that was the 2016 team. Notre Dame sucked. Like, Notre Dame pissed that game away. And that team smacked USC in the mouth. What changed? Did they go out and cut a bunch of guys and go sign a bunch of free agents? Did they make trades? Did they trade future first-round draft picks for, more players? Or was the talent always there, but they didn't have the right people on the field, and they weren't putting them in position to be successful, and it was still coming together as a team? Which of those is true? And that's the frustration. It's what I hate is lazy answers. Oh, just they lack speed. That's lazy. Oh, they don't have the talent you thought they did. That's lazy. We were wrong in our assessment of this team, but it's not talent. It's not talent. That's a lazy answer. And we're going to address the reasons that they are not playing well. And defensively, we've addressed them because this team is not playing as fast as they should. Guys that we have seen play that way. We have seen Isaiah Foskey play like an All-American. We've seen it. Did he all of a sudden lose talent? Did Jason Ademilola lose talent? No. Did Maris Lufau get slow this offseason? No. So what's the problem? Identify that, fix it, and start rolling. Now, the season's ruined from a can you play for a championship standpoint? It is. But now it's about fixing it, building on the foundation so that way you can get rolling and then you don't make these mistakes again. And the coaching staff is going to do one of two things. They're either going to not fix it, which is going to tell me they're not the guys you need to take this program to the next level, right? Or they're going to fix it, and this becomes a lesson learned that then prepares you for what's next, right? Urban Meyer went through this at Ohio State as well, I believe, in 2012 and 2013, because I believe, and I've argued this before, I don't think the Big Ten was really that good in 2012 and 2013. And I think Mark D'Antonio did a phenomenal job during that stretch of taking advantage of Penn State being down. Ohio State was down because of the whole scandal with Tressel, and then you bring in Luke Fickell, and they were coming off of a 7-6, 6-7 season. Penn State was coming off their scandal. Michigan was terrible under Rich Rod and then Brady Hoke. They really did a great job of taking advantage of those teams being down, and Mark D'Antonio built something really good. But, I mean, we saw what happened when Michigan State kind of went on some of the big stages. They were not that good. Right. And Ohio State dominated Urban's first 2 years, dominated a pretty down Big Ten. Went 12-0 his first year and had 2 wins over ranked teams that year. Beat Nebraska, who finished the year 25th, and then beat Michigan, who finished the year 24th. And that Michigan team that year in 2012 went 8-5. That's who they beat. It was not a good year in the Big Ten. Their non-conference was Miami, Florida, UCF, and California. Right?
An 8-5 team finished number 24 in the country.
Yeah. Yep.
Wow.
Yep. Wow. I mean, you could argue that the best team they played that year was UCF, who went 10-3. Right? And so you look at it and 10-4, 10-4, and beat Ball State in a bowl game. Right? and so. And then you come out in 2013, and again, they start off 12-0. They look good, record-wise. But who'd they beat that year? They beat their best win in the regular season. They beat Buffalo, San Diego State, and Cal in the non-conference, weak non-conference. Their best win that year was over a Wisconsin team that finished 22nd and went 9-4. And then they beat a Michigan team who went 7-6, 42-41. You remember that game? Then they went out in the Big Ten title game and got smacked by Michigan State, and they got embarrassed by Clemson. So what I'm pointing to is there were holes that could not get exposed. They got exposed, and Urban said, "Nope, that's not going to happen again." He fires Everett Withers after the Orange Bowl. Well, fires him, right? He got the head coaching job at James Madison, right? Okay. You don't leave at the time, was not in conversation about going D1. They were not a powerhouse yet at the 1AA level. You don't leave as the defensive coordinator at Ohio State to become a FCS head coach if you have a job at Ohio State still, right?
Not wrong.
Are we all smart enough to know that, right?
Yeah.
And so he said, nope, 12-2 is not good enough. These things have been exposed. We need to make a change. He goes and hires Chris Ash. And then the first couple games, it took them a while that next year to kind of get rolling. But once they got rolling, bam, they took off, right? Mm-hmm. And so the talent wasn't the issue against Michigan State. Talent wasn't the issue against Clemson. Talent wasn't the issue against Virginia Tech. It was your team wasn't good yet.
Yeah.
And you have to identify why. I don't think talent's the problem right now. Is the talent at certain positions not where it needs to be? Of course. But it's not a talent problem. That's why they're 0-2.
No.
It needs to get fixed. and it's on both sides of the ball. It needs to get fixed. And you can't just do the whole, well, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing and just do it better. You got to figure out what went wrong. And I do believe, Ryan, there comes a point in time to say, you know what? This is on us. We need to take a step back. And this is what I'm begging for on defense. Take a step back and say, you know what? We were able to do this stuff against Ohio State, and it was a little bit of fool's gold from a scheme standpoint because we had all summer to put this stuff in.
Right.
We had a long time to put this stuff in. We can't do that week after week. It's too much. That's on us. So let's scale it back a little bit. Let's make sure these kids have mastered the basic things are mastered. Once the basics are mastered, then you can ramp it back up. And I think if they can do that, and if they're willing to do that, then I think we're going to see this team get better. If they think that it's this kid's fault, so let's yank him off. It's that kid's fault, so let's yank him off. Those are things that you look at and say, okay, here, if you do this, you can go out and be effective and be successful. And I think those are the things that I want to see from this group. And if they can do that, Ryan, then I do think this will get fixed and we won't be talking about talent at the end of the year. If they don't do that, then this team will continue to underachieve, in my opinion.
I think no matter what, Brian, at the end of the day, whether we, not saying you and me, but just generally speaking, whether a person to a person doesn't agree on what the talent level is in Notre Dame or doesn't agree on what the actual problems are with the team currently, the 2022 version of Notre Dame team, the one thing we can all agree on is it has to be fixed, right? That's the one thing that we agree on is that there's something not working and it has to be fixed. That's the point blank to it. And we have laid out a lot of things, obviously, in this podcast about what we think are some of the key issues. And I hope that this was something that people kind of take away and just say like, hey, there's a problem here and there's a fundamental reason why these players are not making plays, why this player is not playing fast. And I think that it's all about accentuating strengths, man. I really do. And what's the best way to accentuate strengths? To your points, it's not dumbing it down. It is scaling back a little bit and asking a player to do 1 to 2 things really well instead of trying to do 7 things and not doing them overly well, right? Mm-hmm. You need to know, what does Isaiah Foskey do well? What does Jason Amalola do well? What does Riley Mills do well? What does Ramon Henderson do well? Whatever. Any player that's on the field for Notre Dame's defense, what do they do well? Let's ask him to do it, right? Because at the end of the day, Brian, another thing that it will do for you is if you do that and you scale it back and you don't ask them to do as much, if the issues are still there and they don't play better, then you know what the issue is at the end of the day, right? Then at that point, you're like, okay, maybe this player just isn't good enough in this role. Maybe this player, maybe we have a fundamental hole in this position group or this area of the field. You have an evaluation opportunity moving forward on top of having growth potential right now. And you need to, in order to find out what the absolute problem is, I think, again, scaling back is going to show what some of the key issues are even further.
I think one thing I want to see from the players, and this is something I'm hearing a little bit, is you got to stop talking about what the last coach did. Well, this is how we did it with so-and-so. Because if you're not buying in to what the new staff is doing, then you're not going to know if it is truly that or if it's you or if it's both. Right. So there's got to be complete trust in this. And I see sometimes that being a little bit of an issue. So that's got to get fixed. And so I think that's one of those kind of come together moments that you need to see. Now, you may not be happy about what they're asking you to do, but just do what they're asking you to do. And if it doesn't work, then you can do it with all your heart and all your might and all your soul. And then if it doesn't work, then you can go out and fix it. And I think that's something that we need to see from this group as well, Ryan, because if the buy-in's not there, and I'm not saying this is a problem, I'm just saying this can be a problem when a team is successful and you have a coaching staff turnover because coaches leave for other opportunities, not from a fired, like, be easy if you were 4-8 last year to say, hey, I'm not doing what the last coach did. Right. We sucked, right? But when you had success and a new coach comes in and says, hey, man, I'm going to ask you to do something different. If your mind's not right about that, then you're not going to be as successful. And I wonder sometimes if that's part of the issue that we're seeing, especially with some of the defensive linemen, if that might be part of the issue.
Yeah, I mean, and again, this is like the number one thing for relationships, right? In order for relationships to be successful, you have to have trust and it's a two-way street, right? And it comes down to the coach to player relationship. For them to both benefit, they have to have trust in each other. So, I mean, again, to your point, is that the reason that it's not working right now? We don't know. Maybe not. Maybe
Right.
so. Who knows? Regardless, though, in order for them to have growth, you need to have trust in each side, right? And if it's not, they need to figure out what the common ground
Right.
is, because it's right. Again, we can all agree what's going on right now. It's not working.
Right.
Something
And you
needs
can't
to
go out and get
change.
new players right now. You can go out and
Yep.
get new players for next year, but you can't get them right now. And your job is to win, because I don't care what you say about the talent. The talent is good enough to have beaten Marshall no matter how poorly you played. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You're not
That's the
Texas
biggest.
A&M. You're supposed to be chasing Clemson and Ohio State and Alabama. Not saying, well, Texas A&M also lost. Well, Texas A&M sucks and has not been good for years and is vastly overrated.
Sure.
Right? That's not the standard. That's not okay. Well, because Texas A&M lost to App State. No, you're not supposed to be on the same level as Texas A&M. You're supposed to be above that. And so
Well,
there's no talent excuse for what we saw Saturday.
I think the Marshall thing too, Brian, was like the biggest indicator. And after the Marshall game, I think that thing, like the whole they don't have speed and like all that stupid stuff, right? Like that should not even have been on anybody's minds.
Right.
Like
It's just
even if you
easy.
think even
It's
if you
just
think
easy.
it's true, guys, you really thought they lost the game against Marshall because they weren't as talented as Marshall? Like honestly, that's your real thought. I'm sure there is somebody out there that actually thinks that.
No,
but
there's
like,
there's definitely
silly.
people out there that think
It's
that.
silly.
I've seen it. I've heard it. I've had people send me stuff. It's ridiculous.
No,
Like
Notre
the other
Dame
was, well,
lost
they
against
lost because
Marshall.
Marshall brought in a bunch of transfers. Well, one of those transfers was working at like Home Depot or something a year ago, right?
So
like
funny, man.
you know,
So
like
funny.
transfers from where? These are not future NFL draft picks, and so we're all looking for answers, and sometimes I think we can grab onto the wrong things.
Mhm.
And it was the same thing last year. We heard, oh, it's talent. They don't have the talent. And then all of a sudden, later in the year, like, oh, wow, maybe they did have talent. Maybe this guy actually is good. You know what I mean? Well, he was always good. And, you know, I think last year, Ryan, something that you and I always believed is true is Notre Dame fans did not appreciate Jack Cohn enough last year. Like, if you take Jack Cohn off last year's team, Notre Dame has at least 3 regular season losses. They lose to Florida State, they lose to Toledo, and they probably lose to Virginia Tech. So it'd be 4 regular season losses, in my opinion. So I'm not saying that means Tyler Buckner stinks. I'm just saying you didn't have that guy that could just rescue you like you had last year. You needed to fix the problems that existed. And my frustration is they did not fix the problems that existed. They've only added to them. But there's a chance to rebound. And that's where that's what I'm excited to learn, Ryan, because this sucks.
Yep.
And I'd rather not be here. But now that we're here, I'm kind of encouraged because I want to see how Coach Freeman responds to this.
How to get up.
He's being put in a situation we didn't expect him to be put in. Well, how do you respond? You know, are you able to kind of get the team going in the right direction? Because you got a lot of guys right now pointing fingers. Well, we're losing because, you know, Coach Washington did this and Coach Elston did this, or because Coach Quinn did this and Coach Easthand's doing this, or, you know, Coach Golden's doing this when Coach Freeman or Coach Lee would do this. You start to see that stuff creep in. It's up to the head coach to say, nope. Here we go.
Yep.
Here we go. This is what the opportunity is in front of us. You know, hey, Isaiah and Patterson, and you guys may not be playing for a championship anymore, but you're playing for something. You're playing, you know, legacy. You want to leave Notre Dame, but also you're playing for NFL draft status right now. Right now, you're going to do that by playing within the framework of what we're asking you to do. You got to trust us, and we got to trust you. And it's an opportunity for him to kind of say, hey, what we've been doing is, you know, we're gonna come out here and we're gonna fix this. We're gonna get this rolling. And so you do that, and then all of a sudden things get fixed. Because what you're doing now is not good enough, and it needs to get corrected, and it needs to get fixed. And you're going to learn a lot about Coach Freeman right now. And somebody said, don't forget about Kyron Williams. Kyron Williams is part of the reason that Toledo took the lead. I mean, he fumbled a ball that allowed Toledo to go down and score. Kyron didn't do a whole lot early in the year last year. So, no, I'm not – Kyron, like, no, no, that's not the reason you're losing. I'm sorry. Because Kyron didn't do jack early in the year when the offensive line wasn't playing well, because no running back can do jack outside of Barry Sanders can do jack when the offensive line is not blocking, right? So Kyron doesn't fix anything now, in my opinion. There's one play you could point to and say Kyron would have done better than it was the blitz pickup against Marshall this last week.
Sure.
But we saw the same issues last year when Kyron was back there, and it's I'm not blaming Kyron. It's a back is not going to do anything when the offensive line is not blocking. And when the play calling has been what it's been.
Kyron was a really good football player, but again, it comes back to the talent stuff, right? I guess some people might believe this, but like, I don't believe it that Chris Tyree, Audric Estime, and Logan Diggs aren't good football players. Like, I don't agree with that. I just don't agree.
Right.
So they are all good football players. If anybody is sitting here and saying there's a lack of talent at the position, I don't know what to tell you, except that I just eminently do not agree with that sentiment.
Well, I mean, again, look at last year. Look what Kyron did last year. Right. And again, this isn't about Kyron, Ryan. I get what you're saying. Not Ryan, the guy that left the comment. I get what you're saying about that. But look, my point is, Kyron is not the reason that they came back and won those games, right? And it was Jack Cohn making those plays. Now, Kyron was a good player, but again, Kyron was not playing good football early last year. It wasn't his fault. There was nowhere to run, but he had the bad fumble against Toledo that proved costly. And, you look at the things that he did do well. I mean, he had a 43-yard touchdown run against Toledo last year, right? That gave Notre Dame a 14-9 lead.
That was with Buckner in the game. And
right. Yep. He finished the game with 78 yards. I mean, so on his other 15 carries, he had like 30-some yards. He averaged 2.3 yards per carry against Penn State. He went for 33 yards on 1.8 yards per carry against Wisconsin. He went for 45 yards rushing on 3.5 yards per carry against Cincinnati. He didn't have his first 100-yard game until late October against USC. That's not Kyron's fault. Nope. You know what I mean? Like, that's not his fault. It was the offensive line stunk. But that's kind of where I'm coming down. And then again, Notre Dame is up on Toledo 24-22. They're trying to go down, ice the game. There's 3.5 minutes left, and Kyron fumbles, loses the ball. Toledo gets the ball back, goes down and scores. And then Jack rescued him by coming out the next series. So I understand what you're saying, but it was more about Jack rescuing them late. Yep. And so, that's just the reality of it is this team was not where it needed to be, and that's not okay. Like, this isn't me saying, well, this is Brian Kelly's fault. No. Brian Kelly left the problems in the program that we've been addressing for 9 months. But Marcus Freeman and his staff are supposed to fix those problems. And so far they haven't. What I'm excited about, and excited is also not so much it's going to happen, but we're going to learn one way or the other. Excited about is, can this staff identify the problems, number one, and then fix them? Because it's almost all of it is fixable relative to what's left on your schedule. Right. And so, because Notre Dame's not the only flawed team out there. I mean, there's a lot of flawed teams right now, and it's early in the year, and they're all evolving. How will Notre Dame evolve? Will they let this snowball like 2016? Or will this team sack up and say, you know what, fellas? This isn't going to happen to us. We're going to fix this, and we're going to go start winning some games. Yep. And the offense has to do that. The defense has to do that. The coaching staff has to do that. And honestly, fans have to do that, because I'm already seeing fans. I'm not going to go to next week's game. Come on now. You know what I mean? Like, this is when your team needs you the most. And you've got people jumping ship and bailing and all that kind of stuff. It's like you're questioning the players want to. Well, when the first time things go bad for you, you cancel your membership to Irish Breakdown and Irish Illustrated and these other things. I'm not going to watch anymore. You announce to the whole world, I'm not going to be on the message board anymore because this team sucks. Like, well, who's quitting? Who's giving up now? Right? Like, so it's every part of this program, and every part of Notre Dame Nation needs to say, okay, our backs are against the wall. What are we going to do? We're going to not show up to games and cheer now? You're going to boo your starting quarterback who hurts his shoulder? You're going to boo him? You're going to have people in the stands. Ryan, you were around someone who said, good, I'm glad he's hurt, basically.
Finally,
really?
Out, yeah,
really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's how we're going to be. And I think Notre Dame fans are better than that. And I think people in this chat are better than that. So it's like, look, we can point out things that are messed up that we don't like, but let's try to figure out what needs to happen, what can happen, and support the team one or the other. Support doesn't mean blind faith. This is what I hate. I hate people say, well, if you're being critical of the team, you're not a true fan. Bullcrap. Bullcrap. Being a true fan means being willing to point out, hey, that's not okay. That's not all right. You got to fix that. Right. And fans should be able to do that. And if you're going to be part of this channel, you're going to do that. Right. That's what we do. But there's that. And then there's, cheering when your starting quarterback gets hurt. Right. Like that's not okay. So it's all of us. All of us got to do a better job.
And if anybody is giving away their tickets to the Cal game, if you want to hit up at Rise and Draft on Twitter, I will gladly take them for free.
Yeah. Well, I want to say this too. Joel Leeson said this. He says, Brian, BK checked out 5 years ago. Guys like Jack, Kyron, Ian, etc. covered for a lot of bad things. Those guys won a lot of close games in spite of BK and bad recruiting. Coach Freeman is forced to clean up. There's one guy in there that I'm not necessarily going to throw into that conversation, to be honest with you, but like Kyron is an example of that. Sure. I think you're referring to Jack Cohn there. I'd point to Isaiah Foskey last year and just great individual performances last year. You're no doubt right about that. And we've talked about this. And yes, Coach Freeman is forced to clean those up, but he isn't so far. And that's the point, right? And now that doesn't mean he's done. Oh, he's never going to be successful. He's in over his head. I can't stand. That's another one of those that I think is lazy analysis. Oh, he's in over his head, and you try to read it. Like I've literally had two different people listen to his Monday press conference and give me two completely different examples or responses to it. Oh, perfect evidence of he's in over his head. Okay. Another guy, he showed me honesty. And it's like, because you're going into it with a certain perception and then you're taking out of that whatever your perception was going in.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And that's just that's the way that it is. But his task is to clean it up. And the reality is, whether you're pro Marcus Freeman or not pro Marcus Freeman, the reality is he has not done that for the first 2 weeks. And that's on him. That's not on Brian Kelly, right? It's because, again, you lost to Marshall, right? You lost to Marshall.
It's the point blank to it, man. Point blank to
it. Not Michigan, not Ohio State in week 2, Clemson in week 2. You lost to Ohio State week 1. You didn't lose to Clemson. You didn't lose to USC. You didn't lose to Michigan. You lost to Marshall at home. Right? That's not Brian Kelly's fault.
Nope.
Right? You were tasked with, Notre Dame would have lost this game last year too. Yeah, exactly, which is why we wanted Brian Kelly gone. Right? Because so those things don't happen. And that's what Coach Freeman has to do. That's what he has to do. And that means making tough choices sometimes from a coaching standpoint. It means making tough choices sometimes from a player standpoint. But I'll tell you the one thing that needs to happen, and I'm going to write about this in my midweek musings coming up. They got to chill with this. Well, this guy doesn't have this trust or that trust or this other thing, because the guys that you're trusting right now, in some instances, are not playing well. Yeah. So put the really talented kid who you may not trust. Because here's the thing. Give me a young guy that's going to go out and play his butt off, who's going to make a mistake, but's going to play his butt off, over the veteran who's getting beat because he's not going at it.
Yeah.
That's my
Brian. It's like if people heard me do a podcast 2 times, right? I'm talking about sample size here for Marcus Freeman. We've seen him coach in 2 football games as a head coach. If they heard me 2 times, you don't make a decision that I'm great at my job right from there. Like eventually you're like, yeah, wow, Ryan really knows what he's doing. Like he's a really intelligent and smart and good looking guy. But you don't just base it off of 2 podcasts, right? Like you have to get a little bit of a sample size to know I'm not full of S. Did you seriously just say it's a good-looking guy? What the heck does that have to do with anything?
I'm sorry. That was very well done. Very well done. So anyway, this Saturday against Cal, and tomorrow we're going to start talking more about Cal, and we're going to go to mailbag here. But I think that kind of wraps up the areas where we feel like we've addressed some things. Somebody said Ryan fishing for a raise, not because he's good looking. I don't discriminate that way. That's illegal. But that was great, Ryan. We're going to talk more about Cal tomorrow, because Ryan and I have a lot of thoughts on Cal from the film that we've watched so far. But I feel like we've done a good job, Ryan, of addressing areas that are fixable, right? Yep. Some stuff can't be fixed, right? You can't go get new players right now. Some of the stuff isn't going to get fixed, but it still should not be as bad as it has been. We address those things. We're going to talk Sean and Vince. Yes, tonight I believe we'll have tonight it's going to be Sean and Jesse. I believe we're going to have IB Nation Sports Talk at 6 p.m. And hey, listen, we need y'all's help. So we have launched the CFB Nation show, and we're not popular with a ton of stuff, but we are populating it with things. We have a show out today with the guys from Sporting News, Bill Bender and Bill Troche, where they talked about, Scott Frost getting fired, Notre Dame falling out of top 25, Michigan picking their quarterback, Alabama's road woes, because Alabama finally played a road game out of conference and didn't look good. Imagine that, right? And so talked about that. And then their second part of their show is going to come out tomorrow. So please check that out. Help us build that podcast up, because the more you all watch it to help us out, the more it gets spread around and shared, and liking that channel would be very helpful to just kind of help us just kind of get it up the SEO ranks and get it up the different algorithms to help people check it out. So there's obviously the YouTube version, but also you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and those type of things. So that's where we're really trying to help get that thing growing right now. And I also want to hear from you all, whether it's DMs, whether it's on the Irish Breakdown message board. I'm going to start doing some things, I think, to kind of populate that stuff too, with just some quick hitters and quick takeaways on the news of college football and games and things like that. Where I think myself and Ryan might do some things along that line as well with the NFL draft as we get closer to the NFL draft. So we're going to have him on the CFB Nation channel doing some NFL draft stuff as well. So, but need y'all help to kind of build that up and get that rocking and rolling as well. So would appreciate that as well. But of course, as always, the main one is here at Irish Breakdown. So make sure that you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell. Don't go anywhere just yet, though, because we do have a mailbag coming up. But we did want to at least get that out to y'all before we move on to the mailbag. So, Ryan, it is mailbag time. Mm-hmm. We've got a lot of good questions and a lot of good discussion, and I love where people's heads are with a lot of these things because I really think that people are trying to think outside the box and think about solutions. So some of the stuff is going to be really good. We have a super chat from Daniel Uske. He says, "Hey, guys, big fan of Irish Breakdown." Thank you, Daniel. Keep up the great work. In your guys' opinion, will we see Jalen Snead or Tyson Ford this year on the playing field?
I feel better about Jalen Snead than Tyson Ford at the moment, just because I think that Tyson Ford is going to continue to physically develop. But I think that Jalen Snead is going to be a kid that at some point, Brian, like I'm going to need to see him at Rover in spurts, right? Like I'm not saying he's the starting Rover down the stretch of the season. What I'm saying is that he needs to be on the field because I just think he's too much of a talented athlete. I think Tyson Ford can potentially push for some reps down the stretch, sure, but I think the long term is more exciting for me about Tyson Ford than like this year. But I think Jalen Snead is just too good of an athlete to keep off the field.
I agree. There's no excuse. We heard how great Junior Tuihalamaka has been. Haven't seen him on defense. No. Haven't seen Jalen Snead. I don't think the defense is afraid to play freshmen because they have played Jaden Mickey and Benjamin Morrison. But I think it's at linebacker, and that's the defensive coordinator's position. Right. Mm-hmm. I think he's going with the veterans because of what we talked about at the beginning, Ryan, which is he's asking a lot of the linebackers.
Yes.
The linebackers especially are being asked of a lot. And that can happen with and it was this way with Mike Elko too, right? Is Mike Elko would ask a lot of the safeties. Why? Because that was a position he coached and he felt I can get these guys ready to play. And he did a good job with it. I mean, the safeties, in 2017, Notre Dame's safety play with like Nick Coleman. And who was the other safety they had on that team? I'm trying to remember who their other safety was. It wasn't Alohi Gilman because he was sitting out that year, I believe. Oh, Jalen Elliott, I know, played a lot that year as well. And I'm trying to remember who the other – I can't believe I'm drawing a blank on this, on who the other safety was. And when I see who it was, I'm going to be ticked at myself of who the safety was in 2016. It was Nick Coleman and Jalen Elliott, I think, right? Isn't that who it was? I know Devin Studd still played a little bit. But, yeah, I think that's who it was. And, well, not great players, both undrafted. Jalen Elliott's at least stuck in the NFL. Nick Coleman is. But the safety play was pretty good that year. Because why? Because the defensive coordinator put them in a position to get his unit to play well. Well, it's only 2 games, but through 2 games, Al Golden has not done that with his position group. And I think a lot of it's because he's asking them to do too much. You've got to get Jalen Snead on the field, have a role for him, and not ask him to do a ton and let him play. And it just needs to happen. It needs to happen. And look, get him on special teams. Get Nolan Ziegler on special teams, right? I get that you want to play your starters and all that kind of stuff, but clearly your starters are wearing down on defense. They need to focus on defense. Let those kids go be maniacs on kick coverage and kick return.
I'm honestly a little bit shocked that we haven't seen Jalen Snead on special teams, to be honest, man. Like I'm shocked that we're not seeing him on a kickoff, just going down and covering a kick. Like it's a little bizarre to me. A little bizarre.
Right. So I do need to see that. I'm with you on that. Got a super chat from Drew Pine's belly button. You guys are a trip. You guys kill me with some of these names. Thank you for the super chat. Defense is going to be fired up. College football playoff is lucky that it's only 4 teams this year. We're going to get right. And if it was 12, we would make some noise. Go Irish. That is the one thing that years like this can make you really, look forward to a 12-team playoff, because if Notre Dame does run the table moving forward, then yes, they're a playoff team.
Sure.
However, I'm just worried about beating Cal right now.
Yes,
I'm not worried about going 12-10-2. I'm not worried about winning your next 10 games. I'm worried about beating Cal.
Yeah.
But I do love the energy and enthusiasm, because could Notre Dame run the table, Ryan? Sure.
Talented enough. Sure. Yeah, sure.
But right now, they're so far from that I'm not even focused on that. I'm just like, can they score? Like you say, like, I don't expect Cal to score a lot on Notre Dame's defense.
No.
But I don't know if Notre Dame can score on Cal's defense. I mean, that's the concern. So I'm just worried about beating Cal right now. And if they beat Cal, then we can worry about North Carolina. And if they get into the bye week 2-2 and they're actually playing really well, then maybe we can start having a conversation of, okay, what can this team do? But honestly, right now, I have one concern if I'm Notre Dame. And I even not forget that. I have one concern. Me, Brian Driscoll, I have one concern. Can they beat Cal? Like, that's where I'm at right now. Because Cal's better than Marshall, Ryan.
They are? No, they absolutely are. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about them during the duration of the week, but Brian, it's as simple as this. Like, I'm not going to keep making this complicated, man. Notre Dame needs to taste victory. Like, this coaching staff needs to taste the victory, man. Like, before we start talking about like 10 games down the road, they need to get a victory. Yeah. Like, they need just one. Because you can't start a win streak if you don't win a football game, right? Like, you have to win. It's a very general thing to kind of say, but like right now you're 0-2 on the season. You lost the bowl game. Marcus Freeman has to get on the board, man. Like, they just have to get on the board and then see what happens from there. Like, it's very cliche to say one game at a time, but when you're trying to gain momentum, it literally is one game at a time. Like, I'm not worried about BYU or Clemson right now or USC or anybody in between. Like, I'm worried about Notre Dame beating Cal. Like, that is the point blank to right now. That they have to taste victory. They have to taste it.
Yeah. And until they do, I'm not focused on what's after that. You know, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But I do love your optimism. It's a refreshing change.
I like it too.
David Carpenter with a super chat. David, thank you very much. In previous years, after a horrible loss like this, I was ready to tune out for the year. This year, because of IB, I'm taking a deep breath and looking forward with informed understanding. I appreciate it. And then David also went on to say, Brian and Ryan, what is the top thing you were looking for in the next game? I know I'll be looking for effort and intensity, because it's really frustrating to see half-assed effort. Honestly, David, that right there is kind of the first thing I'm looking for, more so on offense. I don't think the defense was half-assed. I just think that they were thinking too much. They were uncertain. They played like a group that wasn't sure of what they were doing. And so I think sometimes that can be confused for not playing hard. And I've used this analogy before. Like, I grew up kind of in a town where there was a lot of country around the town. Like, I lived in a kind of a neighborhood, but there was a lot of country. Like, where I grew up in Lima, it's like there's the town, and then outside of it's just nothing but farm town, right? Same thing where I live in Indiana. I would, go back now. I drive out to my uncle's house. I go quickly. I drive with good speed, because even though it's dark, I know where I'm going. I know where the sharp turns are and the weird country roads and all this kind of stuff. I know when the roads get narrow, because I'm familiar with it. So I can drive fast. However, if you've never been there before and it's dark outside, you're not going to drive the same way I am. Does that mean your car's incapable of going above 35 miles an hour? Does it mean you're a passive person or a soft person? No, it's because you don't want to die, because you're out on a road with no light and you don't know where you're going. You don't know when the turns are. You don't know if you're going to get to because you'll get to these country roads where it's literally you're just going for a long time, and all of a sudden it's just the road ends and you can go right left, because if you keep going, you're going to go right to a cornfield. You know what I mean? And if you're just driving fast, you don't know where you're going, then it could get dangerous, right? Same concept. When you're uncertain, same thing. If like, I have the lights off in my house and I walk downstairs, it's dark, but I pretty much can walk down and know where I'm going, because I know the house. But if you're like at some place you've never been before and the lights go out, you're trying to walk around the dark, you're going to walk around uncertain with far less confidence than I am. That's how football is. If you don't know what you're doing or where you're supposed to go, you're not going to go there with the same certainty as you will if you know exactly what to do. And that can be confused for a lack of speed, a lack of effort, a lack of want to. And I don't think those things are lacking at Notre Dame. I think what's lacking is up here. Not that they're not smart enough, but that they're uncertain of what they're supposed to do. That's what I think is going on. I don't think it's a pride. It is a pride thing to a degree, but it's not a pride thing from like they're playing like they don't care. I don't think that's the case. They're not playing well, David. Yep. So I think for me, what you're viewing as effort and playing with heart, I view as confidence in what they're doing. So it's gonna look the same, David and Ryan. I think you'll agree with me. Is if we see the linebackers flying around on Saturday, it doesn't mean that they care all of a sudden, or they're not playing half-assed anymore because they weren't trying hard. It's because whatever they did in the week of practice, those kids were prepared for what they needed to do to execute on Saturday. It's really as simple as that. Same thing with the wide receivers. I don't think Jaden Thomas doesn't care. I don't think Jaden Thomas is soft. I don't think Jaden Thomas has a lack of want to. I think Jaden Thomas played the way he played that ball because he's not real confident in himself right now. And that's not okay. That's not okay. But you never heard me say Jaden Thomas doesn't give a crap. He's playing like he doesn't care. No, he's playing poorly. Sure. He's playing like a kid who doesn't know what he's doing. And he's not fighting for the ball because of that. Right. But I'm not questioning, and that would cause me to take him off the field. You know what I mean? And he's got to earn that back from me. But that's still not about him not giving a crap. I think Jaden Thomas gives a crap. Sure. It's just he's not playing well. And I think sometimes that can be confused for negative things that sometimes are true. In this case, I just don't think that it is. I am concerned about saying that on Saturday, though, Ryan. I am concerned about some guys checking out after 0-2. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm very concerned about that, which is we're going to learn a lot about this team from that. And so that, to me, is the absolute first thing that I'm looking for, because no matter what the coaching changes may be, they may simplify things, do this, make this change, put this guy in. But if dudes are checking out and don't have that deep pride of, hey, we're going to freaking fix this, which is the first thing we talked about in today's show, then it's still going to be an ugly product. And I'm going to be honest with you, Ryan. That's the uncertainty of how they're going to respond to 0-2. That is my biggest concern on Saturday. And that's the first thing I'm going to be looking for coming into that game.
I just want to see progress. I mean, I think the biggest thing for me, Brian, is from game 1 to game 2, I didn't see progress, man. Like, I didn't see them get better in certain areas, right? So whether that is maintaining and establishing and maintaining a block, whether that is finishing through the catch point as a wide receiver, whether that is reading your keys faster as a linebacker, whether it is getting off of blocks as a defensive lineman, whether it is, being proactive and getting out of your pedal a little faster as a corner. All those things are independent to their positions, David, but at the end of the day, I need to see them look like they are working at their craft, and there's been an attention to detail. So I guess attention to detail is my biggest thing, right? Like, I just need to see progress. I need to see more confidence. Those things need to happen, because right now, I mean, to your point, Brian, it could be easy for some guys to check out. If we're being honest, like, it could be easy right now. It could be. But if they're building this atmosphere and this aura around the program that we think they are, after a loss like this, they're going to come back and they're going to work harder, and you're going to see progress, right? So I need to see progress. I need to see the attention to detail is my biggest thing in this game from the technical side. And just as that ensues, I think you're going to see players playing faster. So I want to see the attention to detail in this one.
Yep. Next question here, and we got some really, really good ones today, Ryan, that we're going to get to here. You guys have really brought some good stuff here today, so I appreciate that. Irish Mojo 25. The defensive line just looks slow with their feet right now. Hopefully simplifying and or narrowing down positions will let them play fast and free. Yeah, that's true. Part of me wonders, Ryan, is if they're looking slow because they're being like, you're going to look slow when you're being asked to come off and eat up space.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what they're being asked to do, but all I see is a lot of feet stopping. And guess what? If you don't move your feet, you're going to look slow. And again, it goes back to they're not playing with the same. Like there was just you knew you were going to get at least 3 times a game last year with Isaiah Foskey. There's going to be at least 3 snaps a game where he was just going to crush somebody off the edge. Just say, screw it, I'm going to blow past this guy. And we haven't seen that once this year. Yeah. Like that I can think of. Maybe there's one he had one good pass rush against Ohio State in the second half. One. I remember that now. But outside of that, we haven't seen that. Why? Like, that's what Al Golden has to do. Why? Why was this kid last year a flat-out dude and he's doing nothing for us now? Why? And figure it out and then turn him loose. Like, simple as that. Like, and it's not always as simple as just play another guy. Because after the first game, everybody was begging for Jordan Patelho. Did you watch Jordan Patelho on Saturday? He was taking up space. And I don't mean that like two-gapping. I mean, he was just taking up space. It was not good. And so you look, you got to go out there and figure out who's gonna go out there and play with their hair on fire. And we're not seeing that right now from this defense. And to your point, Mojo, and I don't know why. We have some things we think why, but to a degree, we're just kind of we're thinking, we're trying to figure it out. But what I know is guys that we've seen play fast are playing not fast. And that's either they all got slow in the offseason, and all of a sudden, Matt Bayless, who's considered one of the best strength coaches of the business, all of a sudden forgot how to get guys ready for the season. You can either believe that, or you can believe that there's something going on inside their head that's slowing them down mentally, which is going to slow down your body.
Uncertainty with what you're being asked to do. I mean, that's got to be what it is, right? I mean, because I mean, Brian, we were talking again about the Foskey stuff, right? And I know that he didn't really have a repertoire of moves last year, but like it seems when he just gets to the top of the track and he's not able to win around the edge, it's just like he doesn't know what to do anymore, right? Like it just seems like there's uncertainty with guys coming off the football right now. And again, I don't know if that's they're being asked to do something that they're not comfortable doing. I don't know if that's a structural thing. Like I don't know what it is either. I don't. I wish I knew the answers. I wish I knew, because then I could give you this astounding and enlightening analysis. But the point blank to it is it's not good enough. And I'm going to keep reiterating that. The defensive line we thought was going to be one of the best defensive lines in all of college football this year. We did. I did at least. And it's not come to fruition right now. So whatever the limiting factor is that is causing these players to not have the impact that we know they can have, that's the most frustrating part, is that we have seen it, right? Like you've seen Foskey do it. You've seen Jason Adamalola do it. You even saw Riley Mills do it last year when they let him loose. Like you've seen it. For whatever reason, you're not seeing it right now, and you have to see it.
Yep, absolutely agree. Notre Dame 2164, bottom line with Foskey, he has to get moves that can just beat him with speed. And I understand that, Brendan.
Don't disagree with that, yeah.
We have talked about that a lot, but here's my pushback to that. But that's all he had last year, and he was still a beast.
Sure.
Right? So, like, we said all year, if Isaiah Foskey simply just plays the way he did last year, he's going to be pretty good. Well, he's not playing the same way he did last year. No. He's not. And that's the concern. So, yes, he needs to expand his repertoire, but sometimes if you try to expand your repertoire too much, now all of a sudden you're trying to do – and this used to drive me nuts about Dalen Hayes. Dalen Hayes would always try to do, like, all these moves. And it's like, dude, just – that guy's slow. Just freaking run by him.
Yeah.
And then once you run by him, then, like, your counter moves only work if you have the one move that you're good at, right?
Yes.
And so you got to use that one move first, then make teams overset to what you're doing and react to what you're doing. Then your moves come off of that. But like if my best move is my speed move and this guy's yet to stop me, it's like I was a pitcher in high school. I threw very, very few off-speed pitches. So, well, why not? Because nobody can hit my fastball. It's like, why am I throwing a bunch of curveballs and changeups of people who can't hit my fastball? If they start hitting my fastball, then I'll throw some other stuff, right? And it's the same thing here. Like, make the guy block your number one move first before you move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And so, that's the thing is Notre Dame 2164. I don't disagree with your sentiment at all, but he's not even using that one move right now. When have you seen Isaiah Foskey just fly off the edge and beat a guy? I haven't seen it yet, really.
Or used a long arm, like you just haven't seen it. Yeah.
So we're not even seeing what we saw last year. I would gladly take his one move of beat him with speed that we saw last year, which is the long arm move that he would use. I would gladly take that. I think that would be effective because it's better than what we're seeing right now. And he's too good of a player to not be better than what he is right now.
No doubt.
Brian Loftus says, Brian, you were a coach. What are your thoughts on the captain and leader throwing his helmet down and trying to storm off? It doesn't set a good example or tone for the younger guys, referring to Jarrett Patterson. I agree. And look, I get it. Jarrett was frustrated. I'm assuming he was mad at himself for his huge mistake in the fourth quarter. I'm assuming he was mad at the team for losing. I'm assuming he's mad at the offensive line for not. I mean, there's a lot of justifiable reasons for that. But your fifth-year captain cannot do that.
Yep.
And my hope is that he owns it and says something to the team. It needs to happen. And I think Coach Freeman needs to make sure that it happens if Jarrett doesn't do it already, because there has to be accountability. And when you let your fifth-year senior captain act that way, and then there's no consequences, then at that point in time, other people say, well, if Jarrett can do it, I can do it.
Right.
Right. And then you punish the younger.
Standard.
Right.
Yeah.
You punish the younger kid. Well, wait a minute. Hold on a second. I didn't do anything different than what Jarrett did. Why are you not punishing me? And I'm not punishment. Like, we're grown-ups, right? Like, punishment isn't always, sit them, don't plant. No. Punishment, sometimes the biggest punishment is make a kid humble himself in front of his entire team. I don't mean humble, so I don't mean humiliate him. I mean, make him stand in front of the entire team, own what he did, and apologize to the team. Sometimes that's enough. You know what I mean? Especially for a kid who takes pride in being a leader, which we know Jarrett Patterson does. And so you don't make a mountain out of a molehill, but you also don't let it go without some level of public acknowledgement with the football team. I don't care if they say something to us. This isn't about us or the fans or whatever. This is about the team.
It's got to be in the team, yeah.
And then you better freaking come out against Cal and and play great. You don't act like that and then come out against Cal and not play well. But I also will say this.
Yeah.
I still don't think he should have played on Saturday. I think it was a mistake. He was not quick on Saturday. He did not look like his normal self. They panicked and brought him back too soon, in my opinion. And I think that was a mistake. And this is why we said all week, if you can't beat Jarrett Patterson, or if you can't beat Marshall without Jarrett Patterson, you got much bigger problems. And to me, it was more important to get him healthy, and they did not do that. And that to me was a mistake.
The key for growth for Jarrett is next step is, hey, after you have that moments of clarity with your team and you kind of move forward here, you got to learn how to harness that a little better, right? Like I love that he was pissed off, Brian. I love that he was pissed off because that tells me that he cares, right? That's perfect. You got to use it in a different way, Jared. Like on the field, in your leadership role, whatever it is, like you can use that, right? Like and it's not an easy thing to do sometimes. Like I was a little bit of a hothead when I played sports too. Like I got very over the top at times, right? Because I was a very competitive kid. But there were moments as I got older where you start to figure out like, hey, it's okay to use this differently than just having an outburst, right? Just using just do it, just having an outward kind of abrupt moment like that. So I think that Jared, I like that he's mad. I like that he's angry. Just needs to learn how to harness that a little differently. And then we'll be all right.
Agree. Wayne Miller says, are players playing poorly because they're not adapting to the new coaching lessons? I think that's part of it, Wayne. I think it's part of it. I think it's part of it. I think it'd be naive to dismiss that entirely. I just think there's a little bit more to it than that. But it would definitely Ryan, I think it would absolutely be naive to just assume, no, that's not it. That's not it at all. Because you have a bunch of new coaches and guys at some of those spots. I mean, like what's a position that we're like, that unit's playing pretty well, right? It's corners. Safeties, they're playing pretty well. Well, guess what? They've got coaches that have been there for a while.
That's true.
Right? I mean, what are the positions that they're not playing as well? Positions where they got new coaches.
And
So it'd be naive to say, oh, no, that's not it. It's not it. So with one exception, obviously quarterback's the one exception, but those are at least new players in there. Sure. So you could somewhat justify that. I'm not, but I'm saying you could. Whereas
if you wanted to.
Right. If you wanted to, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
But secondary wise, I mean, it's mostly the same guy. I mean, Clarence Lewis has played a lot better this year. It's 2 games, but he also went against the best pass offense he's going to face until the end of the season and played really well.
Yeah.
I don't remember Clarence getting any balls caught on him against Marshall. I think he had a couple like little hitch routes caught right in front of him.
Yeah, it was a couple hitches.
Yeah, it's like stuff where it's like the no cover zone. It's not like they were completing balls on him per se.
Right.
So, I mean, I think Clarence has played very well. Right. I think DJ Brown and Houston Griffith aren't making a lot of plays, but you know what else? They're not getting beat. Playing good football. I mean, they're doing what they're being asked to do, and that's all
Clarence
you can do.
Lewis is playing really good ball.
Yeah. Right.
So I meant Tariq Bracey's playing really good ball.
Oh, Tariq Bracey's playing great ball.
Yeah.
And your freshmen are doing some nice things, right? And so, for me, that's kind of I look at it and say, but what's the one thing those two positions have in common? Right, like so. Clarence Lewis, according to PFF, gave up four completions on 4 attempts on Saturday for 29 yards. That's basically completing a little 3-4 yard route, and then he comes up and tackles the guy. which is you're giving that. It's called a no cover zone. You're giving that and then rally to the ball and catch it. You'll do that sometimes, and that's all that was. So, 4 catches for 29 yards. And the longest he gave up was 11 yards, according to PFF, which means the other 3 catches went for a grand total of 18 yards. So, Ryan, the one common theme there is the position that we are most concerned about is playing the best ball right now because they have coaches that are back. So, yeah, there's something to that, but that's not the only excuse. That's not the only thing that's the problem. There's a lot more to it than that.
Yep, sure is.
Here's an interesting one from 99 Problems of a BK81. Brian and Ryan, how hard is it to be as logical and level-headed as you are, given that you both are also huge fans?
It's hard sometimes. Yeah, it's hard sometimes, 99 Problems. I mean, honestly, like after the game, I mean, I posted on the message board, right, that like it was just great to meet everyone and at the tailgate and everything. And then I told them that you can get back to your negativity because I'd be lying if after the game I wasn't like, wow, man, I just saw that. Like, that was crazy, right? Mm-hmm. I think the biggest thing is that you have to know when to kind of move on, right? Like, that's the biggest thing for me is that, like, what is dwelling on Marshall going to do for me now? Is it going to do anything for me? Absolutely not. It's not going to do anything for the team either, right? Like, them kind of just looking at all the mistakes they made. They know what the mistakes they made. They were in the film room probably the next morning watching all the mistakes that they had on that Saturday game, right? So I think the biggest thing for me is that, like, it's okay to be upset. It's okay to be disappointed. Like, those things are fine. It's just at some point you got to move on, right? And then, like, my biggest thing is, like, I don't wake up any morning thinking, like, oh, man, today's going to be a bad day, right? Like, I don't do that. It's like, what can I do right now to make today the best possible day that I can have, or tomorrow the best possible day? And I think that that's, for the team right now, has to be the emphasis. Like, Coach Golden, Coach Freeman, whoever has to look at this team and be like, all right, where do we go from now, right? Like, what are our goals moving forward and how do we get there? So I think it's just the level-headedness just comes from knowing that I've been a fan my entire life. I've had a lot of disappointment, and understanding that, like, hey, what is that going to do for me anymore, right? It's the next step. The next step's the only thing I can control anymore.
Right. And we have a job to do. And that's the other thing. Like, trust me, I hate doing shows after they lose. I hate writing articles after they lose. I just want to go home and be pissed off for a couple hours. I got a job to do, and that's what it is too. And I think it's over time. You learn to be able to, and Ryan will learn this in time as well, even more than he already has, is just over time. It's just during a game, you get so focused on the game and doing your job. And what do I got to write after this? How am I going to talk about this? How do I describe this? That you don't look at it so much as a fan. Like, I was more angry Sunday than I was Saturday. Because Saturday I was focused on, I got a job to do. And on Sunday it was like, are you freaking kidding me? And especially watching the film on Sunday. Oh my gosh. And then on Saturday night, Brian J. Irish says, and while dealing with us crazy pissed off fans as well. I mean, I can't tell me I had to block a guy that's been a pretty good poster on our site because early in the game against Marshall, he's in the chat saying, I hope Marshall knocks Tyler Buckner out of the game. Like, you're a clown at that point in time. Like, I don't care. Oh, I'm just upset. I don't care. Like, if you being upset equals that, then no, Tyler Buckner's not the problem. You are. And then you get people go, like, venting is okay, but then it's like, okay, well, this person's got to get banned. That person's got to go. So that's the other thing too, is it kind of keeps you busy. Is like, I don't have time to think and react to it because I got to make sure that my board doesn't turn into a cesspool, and the chat after the game doesn't turn into a cesspool of just insanity. And for the most part, people were understandably pissed off and venting in an appropriate manner. Most people were. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't take very many people to turn it into something crazy. And so that's the other thing is that it's focusing on the job, right? It's been easier for me to not get pissed now that I have my own site too, because it just is. I can't really explain it, but it's like, we'll be all right. And I'm confident in the product we're putting out and just focus on that, focus on doing the job. And then there'll be time and a place for venting. There's no doubt about it.
And I also love my job, so I don't want to say anything dumb to get me fired from my job,
Smart. Yeah. Very, very smart. All right. Got some more questions here so far. Great questions, everybody, so far. Demetrius Rex, do you guys believe there's too much of an NFL philosophy on both sides of the ball with his 22 team? To a degree, yeah. I think there's a little bit too much of an NFL philosophy from a preparation standpoint. Not quite as much from a schematic standpoint, but from a preparation standpoint. I think in college, Ryan, like the NFL, you're going to pretty much put in a brand new system almost on a weekly basis.
Right.
In the NFL, you got to have your bread and butters every week.
Yeah.
And you've got to have the things you build on. And then you kind of, you find your bread and butter, find your sweet spot. Then each week you kind of, tinker and, hey, let's put in this new play against this team because they do this. But you still have your bread and butter. Mm-hmm. And for Notre Dame right now on either side of the ball, like here's the thing. You always say late in the game, you're going to go to what you believe in and what you have confidence in.
Right.
I know on 3rd and 5, when we get in the situation, this is the play I know we can execute and run effectively. On 3rd and 1, I know if we go to this, we can get it. Does Notre Dame have that on either side of the ball right now? This is the blitz when they got to dial something up that they can go to. This is the stunt. This is the player. They don't have that right now.
They don't have an identity right now.
And in college especially, you need that even more so than in the pros. And that is the concern that I have, is that you do have an offensive coordinator that's kind of always had his eyes on the pros. Not from he wants to leave for the pros per se. I think that people make a little too much of that, but more of that's the level of football that he
values.
Yes. Yeah. A little bit more. And I don't mean that as an insult. It's just that's true for a lot, for some people. And so I think that that's a part of it. And obviously Al Golden's been in the NFL for a while. So, it may take him some time to remember, like, okay, yep, I got college kids again. And the first game was kind of confirmation of, yeah, we're doing this right. Well, then game 2 was like, maybe I need to rethink this a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a little bit of that to it as well.
Yep.
Ladarius Martin says, I appreciate it. Brian and Ryan, please pray for me. I'm going to be gone for a while. Just got a lot going on with my mom. I'm literally in tears right now and talking to God, but thank y'all. I'll be in later. And obviously Ladarius's mom has been sick and is just continuing to deteriorate. So I would ask all of IB Nation, the people that believe in the power of prayer, to definitely lift up Ladarius and his mother today and moving forward. And if you got to be out for a little bit, man, you got to be out, but you know where we'll be when you're ready to come back, man. So you'll definitely be in my family's prayers, and I know there will be others in this chat that will do the same, man. So we got your back. Milton Fan 15, a mailbag question: if the team's issue is culture, how long do you think it takes to get fixed? I suspect the culture is playing not to lose, make mistakes, which is why they look so disjointed. Ryan, I'm gonna go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna say, like, if there's a culture issue, I don't think it ever really gets fixed. If I'm being honest, like,
I think a culture issue can get fixed because you address.
Well, I mean, but if it's derived from the coaching staff, is how I'm saying this, right? Or does he mean a past culture that is now trying to get?
Yeah, I think right now the culture's broken. Right. Now it's either broken because of what's happened before, or it's broken because of what's happening right now. I don't necessarily think it's because of what's happening right now. I think it's because happened before. And so for me, Milton Fan, I should say, for me, it can get fixed quickly, and it can get fixed with a leader standing up and giving the biggest rah-rah speech ever, and then going out and having a great practice. And then, then that takes a step. I think the biggest thing right now is they need a win.
Yes.
I mean, it's really toxic right now. And that stuff can build and build and build and build. And they just need a win. And they need a win where they play well, where they can sort of say, hey, guys, we are this good. We are as good as we thought we were. We weren't doing what we needed to do, but we're taking the steps and, have trust, have faith. And that's where I say it's really got to come from the players. The coaches need to make changes, but the leadership of the team needs to step up and say, hey, fellas, too much of this going on, too much of this, there's way too much of that going on, too much of this going on. We're going to go out there today. We're going to do what we need to do. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to be together. We're going to trust the coaches. They're going to trust us, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And anyone that's not about that, then take a hike. I mean, that's really what needs to happen from a leadership standpoint. That's what captains are for. And hey, no more blaming coaches, whatever. As we've always been, this is what past teams have talked about. They said, I don't care what the coaches do or say. We're in charge of this thing. And that's why they were able to overachieve beyond what their coaching provided. This team's not doing that. It's partly coaching, but I need to see the leaders step up and do this. And that's what I'm saying. Like, you can't have Jarrett Patterson forget the helmet thing after the game. You can't have your team captain jumping on a 3rd and 3 when you got a chance to put the game away.
Yep.
Right. You can't have your captain defensive end just not being a factor and then getting a big face mask penalty, that helps them move a drive. You can't have your star cornerback getting beat inside, setting up a goal line touchdown play. I mean, there was so much of that where it was your veterans that were giving up the plays. It's not Harry Heastand's fault that Jarrett Patterson jumped off sides. It's not Al Washington's fault that Isaiah Foskey ripped the face mask. On and on and on. Now, are there things the coaches need to do better? Yeah, but you got to handle your business first, and that's something past teams had that leadership. We're going to find out if this team has that leadership, because it's going to be about, guys, I don't care what the coach calls. Are you better than the man across me or not? Then go whip him. Simple as that. Go whip him. And this team doesn't have that right now. They didn't have it on Saturday, and they need to get that back. And so to me, that's a cultural thing that can be fixed quickly, because you have that heart to heart of, hey, you're either in with us on this or you're out. And if you're out, then go turn in your jersey and go jump in the portal and go do what you need to do. But if you're going to be here, you're going to be bought in.
Yep.
And anybody that's not bought in, leave. Right? That can't happen from Marcus Freeman. That can't happen from the coach. That's got to happen from Jarrett Patterson and Avery Davis and Isaiah Foskey and J.D. Bertrand and all the captains of this football team and all the leaders of this football team, because not every leader is a captain. That's what's got to happen. And that, more than anything, is going to change the culture. More than anything. Milton Fan 15, Brian, it looks like corners have a tough time getting off blocks, which is why I think Marshall kept going to the flat. No, there were times when that was true, but that was just one of the few problems that they had. There were times they were just getting out leveraged where it had nothing to do with the corners. There were times safeties couldn't get off blocks. So perimeter block destruction is definitely a problem. We talked about that earlier. But a lot of the times it was just them out leveraging a flat defender or a trail defender. They'd go in motion and just send a guy on, or they would so there was a play early where they got a big gain on just a guy went in motion and just ran a quick slide route, and Notre Dame got caught. Tariq Bracy was coming from across the field. Xavier Watts got sucked inside, then went back out, and just the easy little completion, and the guy just runs up the sideline for first down. That's not on block destruction. That's on communication, and just they knew they could out leverage you there. The 3rd and 9 completion at the end on the go-ahead drive in the fourth quarter was not about block destruction. It was about your linebacker and safety not knowing who's picking up the flat defender, the flat receiver. And the guy came from across the field, and it was a similar situation. So it was about communication and just assignment correctness. And those two things went hand in hand on Saturday. So, yes, the block destruction was a bit of an issue on the perimeter runs and the perimeter screens, no doubt.
Yeah.
But it was a corner and safety. The other issue is much more concerning to me than the block destruction one, to be honest with you.
Block destruction, something on every level that needs to get better, though. Every single level.
Yeah. Yep. Irish Blooded asked a question. Honest question we hear a lot when teams are like this. They refer to going back to basics. Do you think there's a fear in doing that the next opponent is expecting it and makes it even harder? I think the fear is not – it's not a fear. I think a lot of coaches are unwilling to, in college, to understand that it's okay to be complex in college, but it's still the best coaches are the ones that teach their kids how to play the game the right way.
Yep.
Right. And, that's something I always respected about Sark, and why I think he did so well at Alabama, and why I think Bill O'Brien has not done as well at Alabama, because Sark understands scheme. But if you go back and study Alabama's offense in 2020, they don't do a lot of stuff. They really don't. They don't have a real complex offense. Their complexity comes from, okay, where's Devontae on this play? I don't know. But they don't have a real expansive route tree. They do what they do, and they coach the heck out of it. That's the thing. They have their RPO schemes, and they coach the freaking mess out of it, and they're masters at it, right? And they have very good players too. But I think that's something that has helped Sark at Texas, as far as putting up some numbers, but it's taking some time to get it to where they had it at Bama, which is why 1 week they look like world beaters, and the next week they get beat by a team they have no business losing to, because you're still getting those guys to play with that week after week after week, where Bill O'Brien thinks it's all about him proving he's the smartest guy in the stadium. That's the difference between Sark and Bill O'Brien. That's why Charlie Weiss failed. Charlie Weiss didn't stop knowing how to call a game in 07, 08, and 09. The difference is he didn't care about teaching kids how to line up and block and tackle and run routes and all that other kind of stuff. So when he inherited players who already knew how to do that, it looked pretty good. When his team was built around guys he had to teach how to do that, they stunk, even though they had really talented players. And so that to me is, I think there are a lot of coaches who are unwilling to understand this isn't about me proving that I'm the smartest guy in the room. Mm-hmm. If I'm the smartest guy in the room, but my players cannot take what I'm teaching them and apply it, then we're not going to be very good. And I'm going to be a really smart, unemployed guy. You know what I mean? And that's the difference between Sark and Bill O'Brien, and why Sark is a champion and why Bill O'Brien is going to have to win one because of other people, right? I'm sorry. That's just the reality of it. If Sark was at Alabama right now, I'm sorry, that game is not close on Saturday. It's not. Pete Kwiatkowski out-coached Bill O'Brien for 60 freaking minutes. It's just he didn't have the dudes that Alabama had. I mean, it's simple as that, in my opinion. And it's because he doesn't appreciate, these guys got to know how to line up and tackle, block, and run routes and catch the ball and do all that kind of stuff. And you don't have the veterans you had last year. You don't have John Mechie, who's been through the battles. You don't have some of these other guys, Brian Robinson, who's been through the battles, and Evan Neal's been through you got some young guys that are still need to be taught how to play the game. Mm-hmm. And you're not doing what you need to do. You're trying to show everyone how smart you are. And I worry about that with Notre Dame. I do. And so we're going to find out this next week if they're willing to say, hey, look, man, this isn't about me and showing how smart I am. We got to teach these kids how to line up. We got to teach them how to block destruct, and we got to teach them how to tackle. And then let them play fast. And then as they do that, then we can add more stuff to it. It doesn't mean you run one call, right? It's not what we're saying, right? It's just you figure out what you're doing well scheme-wise, and then you find your diversity on how guys line up is what you do, in my opinion. Robert Bishop says, does Cal have a good defense, or have they looked just good against two dud opponents early? They have a very good defense.
Yeah,
we've been saying this in the offseason. So for all this stuff about Cal's won 6 of their last 8 games. Mm-hmm. This goes back to last year. They went 4-2 down the stretch, and one of their losses was a 10-3 loss to Arizona.
Yep.
So, yes, this Cal defense is pretty good. Didn't have a great performance against UCLA last year, but other than that, their defense down the stretch was, I thought, pretty good. Beat Colorado down during that stretch 26-3. Beat Stanford 41-11. Beat USC 24-14. They held USC to fewer points than Notre Dame gave up against USC last year. Lost another game 22-17. Lost another game 21-6. Lost a game 24-17. Their defense is legit, in my opinion. Yeah. Now, it's legit schematically. It's got some talent, but this is not like they don't have a bunch of Foskies and Cam Martin. They've got some good players that are coached really well, and they play hard, and they know what they're doing. It's not a super complex defense, Ryan.
No,
it's not.
It's a 3.
They all know what they're doing, and they fly to the ball. They play with great leverage. Yep. They've got midget corners, right?
They do have midget corners, man.
It's like, but they're a smart football team. But their smart is we don't do a lot, but what we do really, really well.
Yeah,
and that allows them to be effective.
Now, and it's something, Robert, where so I broke down a little bit of their film from this week, from the last couple weeks actually, and the offensive players breakdown came out earlier on irishbreakdown.com, and I just submitted the other one for Brian here. So you'll get kind of the defensive breakdown. I'll leave it at this for the sake of time. Justin Wilcox is a really good defensive guy as their head coach, and then they also have Peter Sermon, who was in the NFL for a while. So they have a really good scheme. It's 3-4, so they play a lot of 3-down type of stuff. Nose tackle's a good football player. They have a number 44. What's that defensive end's name, Brian? The 6'6", 270 kid.
Xavier Carlton?
Yeah, Xavier Carlton, man. He's pretty good. He's got some talent. And then you got 2 good inside linebackers. You got a really good safety in Daniel Scott. So they have a few good players, to Brian's point, but more than anything, they are just extremely well coached. Extremely well coached.
Yep, no doubt. No doubt. All right, let's get to some more. This is really funny down here, Ryan. Archer said, Ryan, did your weekly payment of due just arrive? How many cases do you get per week? And is there a performance bonus for staying so exceedingly handsome? So, yeah.
I have no comment for the last part there. But,
Tom Frowley says, Brian, thanks for having the patience to deal with us all. It's not about patience. I love you guys. I mean, I love this community. I really do. Does some of you piss me off sometimes? Yeah, but you know what? I know I piss you off sometimes too. That's what family does, right? But you keep coming back. We keep bringing you back. I love this group. I do. There's some people we got to get rid of, but I love y'all. I love this great community.
I've never pissed you off though, Brian.
Yeah, today. So far.
Not yet today.
So far, not today yet. But no, I do love this community. It is so different than anything I've ever been a part of. And so yeah, you accept like some of you I know love this channel, you respect me and you're loyal to me and what we're building. But I know there's things about my personality you don't like, but you deal with those because you like the other parts about it, right? And when Notre Dame loses, I know what I'm gonna have to deal with, but I get it because the same passion that causes you to overreact to a loss is the same passion that causes you to tune into a podcast at 1:00 in the afternoon in the middle of freaking June, right? And I love that passion. Sometimes it can get unhealthy, and I want to do my part to try to say, look, we can vent and be pissed off, but here's the line. Just don't go past it, right? Go to it, and we'll all be pissed off and vent together, and then we'll get over it and we'll move on and find solutions. So it's not about patience. It just comes with the package. And you can't ask for people to be patient and say that you're going to run a site that's not a homer site and then get mad when people get mad about losing to Marshall. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, I'd have been more concerned if people were like, no big deal. Like, you know what? We're about to have 8,000 subscribers unsubscribe because they just don't care anymore. I love the passion. Sometimes people cross the line, but for the most part, Ryan, would you say, I mean, you were on the board Saturday night. I'd say probably like 95% of the people were venting appropriately. And
I thought it was a lot better than the first week, if I'm being honest. Like, I mean, there's always going to be a couple that just take a little too far, but like for the most part, it was just frustration. And I got it. I was frustrated too. So cool.
Totally understand it. Totally understand it. Tommy Gunn says, I know I piss you off sometimes. Now you're my dude. You do. So when you start getting politics and all that crap on the site, man, we agree on a lot of things, but just not on the board. All right. So, but no, I love you, man. But no, honestly though, seriously, like I love this community, man, and that's why I like building it, and that's why I fight so hard to make sure the people that come in new are part of it. Like I love the fact that in one breath we can be talking football, and the next breath we're praying for somebody's mom. You know what I mean? And people feel like people actually feel comfortable coming to our channel and to our board and saying, "Hey, y'all, I'm struggling personally. I need y'all to pray for me." Like the fact that people feel they have a community to go to when times are tough, whether it's about their football team, whether it's about their personal lives or whatever, I love that. I love that about y'all. So if that means I got to deal with people losing their crap a little bit on a Saturday night after loss to Marshall, so be it. I'll gladly take that because it's worth it to have all the other stuff. And I really think this is a great community. We got a bunch of Notre Dame fans and an Ohio State fan praying for an Alabama fan.
Yeah,
I think that's what we're doing here. And a Michigan fan asking questions that we're going to get here in a second. Like that's a pretty awesome community to me.
Yep.
And it's one that I'm glad that we're a part of.
I never thought I would like talking ball with an Ohio State. And
I know, right?
Here we are. Here we are.
Still having a hard time with it. Notre Dame 2164. Am I overstepping by saying that a coach as seasoned as Al Golden should have seen this result coming? I feel like he should have known this is going to be too complicated, too fast. I understand what you're saying there, but because they had so long to get good at it, it's almost like a false sense of security. And this is why I asked the question last week. I said, one of the things we're going to learn is whether or not Al Golden can get a game plan in a week, right? This is exactly why I asked this question, because it's a lot easier to do it when you got a whole, and this is why I said I wanted Ohio State first, because you get the whole offseason to prepare for Ohio State. You can put a lot more stuff in the opener than you can the next week. And in week 3 and week 4, especially in week 4, when you now have, this team is doing a lot of different things than maybe what they did last year.
Yeah.
Right. And so like North Carolina is doing some different stuff so far this year in 3 games than they did last year because they have a different quarterback. Not better, not worse, just different. He has different strengths. And Phil Longo's done a pretty good job so far of tweaking his offense to really fit what Drake May does well.
Yep.
And so you can't go to last year's film as much only to get ready for North Carolina. So you don't have the same advantage you had going into that game that you had going into the Ohio State game. We had all offseason to learn their tendencies, and they didn't really know what you were going to do. Well, his game plan in the opener against Ohio State and Ryan Day was significantly better than the one against Marshall.
Yep.
And that was why I brought this up last week, because we don't know the answer to that. Now that's where he's got to say, okay, you know what? This is why we struggled. Now let me make my changes. And I think he's going to do that. I hope he's going to do that. Maybe that's wishful thinking, but we'll find out this week. Because if you struggle against this offense, that's a problem.
There's some problems. There's some problems there.
Yeah. And they got some good players, but their line's not good. Their quarterback's not good, and their scheme is very mediocre, in my opinion.
I like your Phil Longo note, Brian. I want to actually talk to you about that the other day, because they're using tight ends a lot more this year, man. Like, they're working the middle of the field a lot more than they ever have. You know, it's not, I feel like under Sam Howell was like a lot of outside the numbers stuff, you know, because he had that good deep balls, and now they're
that's great coaching.
Yes,
this is what I can't run an offense like I have Sam Howell, because I don't have Sam Howell. He's done a great job. Their defense is a hot mess.
Yes.
But offensively, he's done a great job of adapting. I mean, they lost their two best offensive linemen. They lost a 1,000-yard running back. They had another receiver leave the team. And he's working and he hasn't had Josh Downs the last 2 weeks either, because he's been hurt. Did he play this past week? He didn't play this past week. I know he didn't play against App State. Did he play against Georgia State this past weekend?
I'm not 100% sure about that, actually.
Yeah, but he's been banged up. I'm actually going to look that up now. He's been banged up. So not only are you doing all that, but you haven't even had your best receiver the last couple weeks. So yeah, Josh Downs only played in the opener.
I think they have 2 or 3 tight ends on that roster that over 100 yards receiving already, though. It's very different looking offense.
Number 3 and number 5 leading pass catchers on the team right now are tight ends. Yeah. So I mean, and is the running backs are caught 13 balls as well, but not for a lot of yards. No, so I mean, I really like what he's doing so far. So I mean, that's good coaching, right? Build to the town of your players, and that's what great coaches do. I have my philosophy, but I always have to be willing in the college level to tweak my philosophy to the strengths of my specific players, especially my quarterback. And I don't think Notre Dame has done that offensively this year. And I don't think they've necessarily done that defensively. This is not a defense built around what Isaiah Foskey and the D-line do well. This is a defense built around scheme so far and plugging the players into that scheme. And that's an adjustment that Coach Gold needs to make, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. Mark Brown asks, is cross-training too excessive? I don't understand cross-training so many, especially at one time. It isn't in theory. Mm-hmm. It's actually totally understandable in theory, especially when you're coming from the NFL, where you only have 48 active players on a Sunday. And you can only have, an offensive line coach can only have 7 or 8 offensive linemen. You literally have to have at least 2 guys on an NFL team that can play multiple offensive line positions. Same thing a linebacker, same thing at a lot of positions, because you can only have, is it still 48 active, right? You can have 54 on your roster and then 48 active. Is it still that? I know it used to be that, right? I'm not sure if it's still that way in the NFL. And so I understand the need to do that. It's something around there. Well, you have 85 active guys on Saturday. Mm-hmm. you know what I mean? So there's a time and a place where that is okay.
Sure.
But it has to be once they've mastered the one thing that they're doing.
Yes.
Because these are not 25, 26, 27-year-old grown men that are professional athletes. These are college players that are still learning the game in some ways. So in theory, no, Mark, I don't have an issue with cross-training. It's just it has to be done at the right time. And I've made mistakes like that before. Ryan and I have owned that we probably expected too much of Jaden Thomas early on from a playing all over standpoint, right? And that's a mistake. Let him learn one thing first and then figure out the rest. And if they go back to doing that, then I think this team will be fine and this team will get good in a hurry. And then as they master those things, then you can get back to a little bit more cross-training. Jay Montalbano with a question here. So do you think Golden is coaching college players like they are pros? Is that what you guys are saying? And this kind of goes back to the last question. To a degree, sure, but not really. It's not so much that he's teaching them like they're pros because he understands these are college kids with other responsibilities. It's more so a misunderstanding of just how much volume you can put in on these kids in a week. I think that's really what it boils down to. Again, that's why they looked so good in the opener and completely opposite a week later, because you weren't going with the same game plan. You were doing a lot of different things against Marshall that you're doing against Ohio State. And I didn't like the game plan. I didn't understand why they were giving up the quick game so much. Like, that was the exact opposite. What we said all week was do not let them get the quick game. Marshall beat you and did not attempt a single pass. Let me rephrase. They won, but it got called back in a penalty. They only attempted 1 pass beyond 20 yards past the line of scrimmage. 1. Ryan, they only attempted 3 passes beyond 10 yards and still beat Notre Dame. The fact that you allow them to not have to throw the ball downfield to beat you is exactly what we pointed to last week you couldn't do. And they didn't do it. And that's a concern to me, right? That's troubling to me. And I want to see if that gets fixed or not. Because it's the same thing this week. Like, Cal's got a bunch of receivers averaging under 10 yards a catch, which is kind of nuts because, like, J. Michael Sturdivant was a burner.
Can fly, man. Can fly.
And he's averaging 10 points. This is what the Cal receivers are averaging right now. You have their leading receiver, Jeremiah Hunter's 11.3. It's pretty good. J. Michael Sturdivant is 10.4. Number 3 receiver is 8.6. Their number 1 tight end is 9.8. They have another guy at 8.4. The only guys that have it, I mean, you have Monroe Young at 15.7, but that's only on 3 catches. You know, you've got another guy 31 yards a catch because it's 1 catch. You know, I mean, Monroe Young, who's averaging 15.7, he had 1 catch for 1 yard against UNLV. You know, your quarterback's averaging 17.4 yards per attempt, and you're averaging 10.7 yards per completion. This is another team that doesn't like to throw the ball down the field or isn't. And Jack Plummer's got a strong arm, Ryan. He's an incredibly inaccurate deep field passer, though. Always has been.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. Yep. It's just
make him throw the ball down the field.
Yep,
I mean,
that's all it is, man.
It's not that hard. And they didn't do that against Marshall and should have. And it wasn't a numbers thing, Ryan. Like, they had 8 in the box a lot. It just was a leverage thing. And in a how you were asking your corners to play. Like, they were playing tight with their corners, and then at the snap, they would bail them a lot.
It was like press bail. It was really weird. It was really weird.
Which, if you're going to do that against me, once I get a read on, I'm eating you up with quick stuff. And
100%.
You know, because now if you're flipping your hips at the snap and I can get that ball out quickly, I got time to square you up as a receiver. You know, because you got to plant and drive on the ball. A lot of that stuff just didn't make sense to me, Ryan. It really didn't. And yeah, I'm not gonna lie. That's one of those schematic things that is problematic that I want to see corrected. To be honest with you, because it's a problem. Yeah. So far in the season, Jack Plummer's 3 of 10 on balls past 20 yards. And last year at Purdue, let me find it here real quick. I'm gonna see what his numbers were at Purdue because they weren't much better, even with David Bell. You know what? Actually, oh no, that's Aiden O'Connell. Yeah, I was like, wow, he was actually a lot better than I thought. Yeah, Aiden O'Connell last year on deep balls completed 52.7% of his passes. He was 11 of 19 on the left and 10 of 16 to the center. Jack Plummer, on the other hand, was 3 of 9. So Jack Plummer last year completed on intermediate throws, right? So that's even like 10 to 19. He had a lower completion percentage on intermediate throws than Aiden O'Connell had on deep throws. This is not a very accurate quarterback.
That's nutty, man. That is nutty. Yeah. That's
He's
weird.
Not a real accurate quarterback. And so you've got to figure those things out. So
he looks like $1 million, but
he's big, strong armed kid, big NFL body and all that, but you know, just not a real comfortable guy when you talk about sitting him in the pocket.
And it's pretty maddening too, because I know we're not really getting too much into Cal here, but like, you already mentioned Sturdivant, who was a 10.3, 900-meter guy in high school at 6'3", 205 pounds. They also have the Jeremiah Hunter kid can run a little bit too, man. Like, he's not bad either as far as speed, and they can't stretch the field. So
absolutely. John A1 said, "What is the evaluation of Drew Pine as a recruit? I liked the way he played in the Under Armour All-Star game. I thought he could be a good starter, but not great." I think that's kind of what he should be too, right? And we've talked about this. You can beat a lot of teams with Drew Pine as your quarterback. The question is, can you beat the best teams with him at quarterback? That's a bigger question mark. If anyone tries to blame Notre Dame, if they lose to Cal and they try to blame it on, we're going to have Tyler Buckner, I'm going to lose it. It's freaking Cal. It's Cal. You know, and if you didn't recruit good enough quarterbacks that your backup can't beat Cal, then the quarterbacks are not the problem. You're the problem. And I'm not saying Tommy Rees is going to do that. I'm just making a hypothetical argument that some people will make about, oh, you know, you never start quarterback, backup quarterback. Drew Pine is good enough if he's playing the way he's capable of and coming out of high school. Smart, accurate, good decision maker, all that kind of stuff. Plays with moxie. All that stuff is what he should be. He hasn't looked like that guy, though. And you start getting into the questions, is Drew Pine doing the regression thing that we have seen so much from Notre Dame quarterbacks? I mean, Cal lost in Nevada last year, guys. You know, they lost to Washington. They lost to Washington State at home by 15. if you can't beat them with Drew Pine, you have really much bigger problems. But we said this about Marshall last week too, and they do have problems, and they need to get fixed. And if they lose to Cal, honestly, or if it's even competitive, Ryan, honestly, it tells me that the problems. If they just win like 17-13, nothing's got fixed.
Yeah.
Maybe defensively, but offensively, nothing's got fixed.
I said that to Sean on the Monday show, Brian. I was like, if it's a 13-10 game or whatever it ends up being, like something like ugly like that, it's like, yes, you're happy you got a win, but like, was there progress? No, there really wasn't progress. You know, like it's just one of those situations where it's like a bittersweet thing. It's like, yes, taste victory, but also you probably didn't play too well still. Yeah. So
Yep. Here we go. Let's see here. Got Keith Wiegand. Are they rotating too many players in your guys' opinion? This is a good question, Keith, because I want to address this. I do not think they're rotating too many players. I think they're rotating too many players at once. On Marshall's first touchdown drive, there was a point where they were at least 6, and I kept trying to get a count, and guys were coming in and out, but there was at least one snap where I'm pretty confident there was at least 7 non-starters in the lineup. Now, I had no problem with any of those guys playing, but I complained about this last year because they would do this against Florida State. They just go like mass substitution on the front 7 and the D line. I'm like, you can't do that. You should always have at least 2 starters in the game, unless you literally have a co-starter at a position, right? Like that's a little different story. But you don't have that right now. And so there were times they were like, you had backup linebackers, 3 backup D linemen, and 2 backup DBs in the game. And when they did that, like there was one play where they didn't have Foskey, Cam Hart, or Brandon Joseph on the field. And I'm like, no, can't.
Yeah, there was one drive in the second half where I actually said something to my dad because they had a completely backup defensive line in. Like no starters were in. I was just like, really? Like you don't have Foskey or Adam Alola on the field at once? I mean, at all? Like it was, Just to reiterate, there was definitely those moments where you're just kind of like, I don't know if I love those substitutions. It's like substitution in basketball, where like a coach will go to like an all backup lineup for a little bit and then they give up the lead type of thing. And you're just like, I don't think I like that substitution too much, man. Like it's not smart, but yeah.
Like even in games where you're playing a tempo team where you're doing mass substitutions, you do it to where you have your mass substitution mixed with both. Yes. Right, where your lines that you're rotating, you have 2 starters in and 2 starters out. And then you rotate and you have 2 starters in, or one guy always stays. You can't do that, right? You got to be smarter about your substitutions. We saw it last year, and I think we saw it a little bit too much. We're seeing it in the first couple games, especially on Saturday against Marshall.
Agreed.
And it's got to be corrected, in my opinion. Got another one here from Ty B. Thank you, Ty. Does Tommy Reese's scheme not attack space? Sorry if I'm asking the wrong question, but I feel like our skill players are never in open space to make plays with their legs. This is what's so weird about what we've seen the first 2 weeks. Because that's something Tommy did a phenomenal job of in the second half of last year and in the bowl game, was getting guys in space. And we're not seeing that. We're seeing a very stale offense. It's like they're doing a lot of different things, but there's no rhyme or reason to it. And that's why it's like it's puzzling to me because Tommy Reese sucks. Well, but if we saw the game plans that we saw from him last year, we're having a different conversation. That's what's so puzzling about this whole thing. And I don't have answers to why that's the case. Why are they so bad on offense at the beginning of the year the last few years? Because we've really seen this a lot. We saw this in 2021 for Notre Dame, right? I mean, we saw it last year where the offense came out of the gate in the opener smoking, and then for like the next month was like pretty mediocre, right? Really couldn't do a whole lot. We saw it last, so that was strange. And then we saw in 2020, the offense was pretty mediocre against Duke. Moved the ball but couldn't score. Had some big missed opportunities. And then you come out and you're not real great against South Florida. You kind of overwhelm them with talent. Then you have the great Florida State game, and then the next 2 weeks you're just kind of blame it on COVID, right? Then you come out in 2019 and your offense kind of sputters against Louisville. You make enough plays to win, but you're not sharp. You just kind of out-talented them. Then you had a lot of yards against New Mexico, but they sucked. And I remember watching the game like this offense is not crisp. They're just talented. And then you come out the next week against Georgia and your offense can't do anything. You can't do anything on offense against Virginia. Like and that was pre-Tommy Rees, right? That was Chip Long. So, it's not just Tommy Rees. It's like it's puzzling, right? In 2018, of course, we remember how bad the offense was at the beginning of that year as well. So I don't know what the answer is. But then as the years went on in 2021 and 2020, we saw the offense get much better as the years went on. So what is happening from a preparation standpoint going into the season that's causing them to not look in early like they look late? I mean, like not even not look good like execution-wise, but like structurally they look so much different. And that's what's puzzling to me. I really can't put a finger on it. I had a super chat from Jay Henry. Who are good candidates for quarterbacks coach? Jay, no disrespect at all, but like that's just not really a topic that I'm thinking about right now. They have a quarterbacks coach right now. It's Tommy Rees. They have Gus Ragland helping out. We can have this conversation if that job comes open in the offseason. But right now, I'm just focused on the quarterback coach they have, getting things right. After that, like let's say Tommy Rees becomes a head coach in the offseason. And let's say Notre Dame goes and wins the next 10 games and the offense just lights the world on fire. And you realize this was just an anomaly. This was shaking off some rust and getting over some bad habits. And once they got rolling, they roll, right? And they're 40 points a game. And Tommy Rees leaves. Then it depends on, well, who do you have hire as offensive coordinator? Is he a tight ends coach? Is he a receivers coach? Is he a quarterbacks coach? Those are all questions we'll have to answer. And there may be a time and a place for that, but just it's not that your question is invalid, and I appreciate your super chat. It's just it's not really on my radar right now.
That's an off-season question if it becomes a topic of conversation. So
yep. But I appreciate the super chat. Notre Dame, Indy Nation, 2-10 run into a 9-man front 6 times last week. Please explain what Tommy is thinking. Thanks, guys. Always great show. I'm not quite sure if I understand the beginning.
I think he's saying it's 2nd and 10, and you're running into a 9-man box 6 times last week is what he's saying.
I can't explain that.
I mean
the RP. I didn't like really notice that. I'd have to go look at that.
I did know. I don't know about the 9-man box stuff, but I did notice a couple times last week that it was 2nd and long, 2nd and 10, 2nd and 9, and you're just running the football, and it was just kind of
with no safety help. I mean, so I don't know if I'd call that 9 in the box. I know there's one particular play I can think of where the safeties are walked down. I wouldn't call that 9 in the box if that's what you're referring to.
Yeah,
sure, but honestly, that's I can't. And this is what we were talking about yesterday. In that situation, there's only one option for the quarterback. Throw the ball to the field, make them pay. Teams are going to keep doing that until you make them pay.
Mm-hmm.
And like they had some good RPOs early, and then like there's other times you're like, why would you not be running 2nd and 10? Is if you're not running an RPO on 2nd and 10, then there's just something. What it is, it means it's because you're throwing the ball. That's the only time where it's not okay to run an RPO on 2nd and 10, in my opinion, is if you've got a pass play called. That's it. It was confusing.
They had no answer to the RPO, just the bubble that they were running off of it, man. I felt like every time they ran a bubble, they got 5+ yards. Like they just had no answer to it, but went away from it for some reason.
Yeah, there we go. Let's go. We got a few more, and we got to get out of here. We got one from Antoine Johnson. Brian, I have a question. Do you think Notre Dame would benefit from more of a old school West Coast style offense, especially with Pine having a lack of arm power? I think this will also help your O-line. Antoine, we were asked this question yesterday. It is a good question, and I actually think that already sort of exists in what they do. We've seen this in the past. They're not utilizing it now. But like last year when Jack Cohn really got rolling, I mean, Jack Cohn completed over 70% of his passes in the last 6 or 7 games of the year. And it was because there was a lot of quick stuff. I mean, you'd have movement and then running slides out, like they do all these jet motions. Well, one of the things you should do off that is easy throws off of that, not just bubbles. But I have a guy go in motion and then just run him on a slide, just a little slant slide kind of concept, that other teams are running on you, things like that. That's a West Coast principle, catch, read, throw. There's stuff that stuff is built into the offense. And I think the explanation I gave yesterday, Ryan, I think this was actually when you had stepped out. I don't know if you were here for that answer, but the thing that I said was the West Coast so permeates college football and NFL football now that even teams that don't run a West Coast offense have principles that can find themselves from the West Coast. Timing, quick game, spacing, a lot of that stuff finds its home in the West Coast offense, right? And whatever version of that you want to look at. And so I think they have that built in, and I think the principle of what you're referring to, Antoine, is absolutely something Notre Dame needs to do a better job of. They got to get the ball out quickly, move the pocket quickly, get the ball in space, do different things where you're isolating certain defenders. Hey, we're going to isolate the flat defender with this read and this flood concept or this slant snap concept or whatever the case may be, and get back to more rhythm throwing. And that's, to me, what ultimately the West Coast offense, to me, if I had to describe it in one word, it's rhythm. It's I got a 3-step drop.
Yep.
My route's at 3 steps. I'm hitting my drop. And what I loved about the West Coast, there wasn't a lot of stationary routes in the West Coast, at least the Bill Walsh version. There were some. They'd run curl flat, but there's not a lot of stationary routes in the West Coast. That is something I definitely like to see. Like Steve Sarkisian's offense was like that. There's not a lot of, I wouldn't call him a West Coast guy per se, but he's a BYU guy. He's a Lavelle Edwards guy. So he's not a West Coast guy in that, he's running the modern version of the offense he ran under Coach Edwards, right? But what I'll say is, but the soul of the West Coast is present in what he does, which is why you don't see a lot of stationaries. And he's even said this. There's a video where he goes, I'm faster than Julio Jones when he's not running. That's what he says. Meaning, like, if he runs a route and stops, I'm now faster than him if I'm running, right? And the thought behind it is, it's kind of like the Usain Bolt thing I said the other day, is why would you not have him moving? Yeah. And so, there needs to be stationary routes, and I'm all for some stationary routes, but then to not have them know what to do if it's not open. But Sark has very few routes where they just stop. I mean, and his philosophy is like, guys are going to be on the move. That's the only way you get open is if you're on the move. That's the soul of the West Coast offense. Is everything's moving. I'm always on the move. Slants, snaps, outs, posts, corners, all that stuff. It's all movement. And even your triangle stuff that they would run back in the day in the West Coast, it was all, the ball was there when you stopped. So even the stop routes the rhythm was there. So yeah, you may run a curl and you're going to run some kind of triangle. So you'll have like a curl here, a flat there, and then your number 2 guy's running like a little sit route over the middle. We see that all the time now. That finds its heart and soul in the West Coast. But even then on those stop routes, the ball's out. The guy hits he's turning around, the ball's hitting him in the chest because it's rhythm. And they need to develop a rhythm, Antoine. And so and then combine that, Ryan, with what we talked about. There's more movement on your routes. Stop standing around so much on your routes. Those are all West Coast, at their heart and soul, are West Coast principles that Notre Dame has. They're just not using as much. It's not so much the play that the offense is flawed. It's what they're emphasizing is not what they should be emphasizing with this group of players, in my opinion.
Nah, it's very well said. And to Antoine's point, that function of a West Coast, what you're talking about, the rhythm stuff, 3-step, get the ball out, create space, that would be right in Drew Pine's breadbasket, right? Like we've talked a lot about it. He's a player that you need to get in rhythm early, right? Quick throws, get the ball out, timing, those types of things would be great for Drew Pine. So, Antoine, I think you're onto something with like the principle aspect of it, right? Like I don't think Tyrese needs to completely change his offense, fundamentally, but to add in those wrinkles, I agree completely. Yes, the emphasis
it's about changing
on
the emphasis, right?
Yep, 100%.
Yep, I agree. Well, y'all, that's going to do it for today's show. Great questions. There's a lot more I would love to get to. C-Mac had a really good question about Tyler Buckner. We had some other really good questions in there that we're just not going to be able to get to. We gotta get out of here. We got some things we got to get to. So this was a fun show. I really appreciate y'all being with us today. Love the great questions. Love the great interaction in the chat. Obviously, as always, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast. If you're listening via podcast, please check out our CFB Nation channel, all right? Listen to those shows. Help us to grow those. Help us to really get those going. We'll start populating them more and more as time goes on, absolutely. And we'll start having more and more shows on them. But definitely give those a look and a listen to. The guys from Sporting News did a really good show this week. We ended up cutting it into 2. So they're going to do sort of like a look at the latest last week and some notes. And then the second show, which comes out tomorrow at 7 a.m., will be their breakdown of sort of looking at this weekend's big games, because there's some very interesting games this weekend. And they had a very interesting take that, Kansas, Vanderbilt, and Duke all have a chance to go 3-0 this weekend, which is just a very interesting take. So And there was a note in there in one of them that Michigan State has not won a road game over a Pac-12 team in the regular season since the 1950s. They have a chance to do that this weekend when they go out to Washington, who is actually a favorite over the ranked Michigan State team. So a lot of great stuff in there, guys, that you do not want to miss those nuggets. So that's Bill Bender from Sporting News and Bill Trocchi from Sporting News as well. So definitely check that out also. You can find that at the CFB Nation channel. So definitely check that out. And, of course, as always, Ryan, sign up for the message board, everybody. We appreciate you. Have a great rest of your day. 6 o'clock tonight. Sean Stowers will be back with IB Nation Sports Talk. Ryan and I will be back tomorrow, 1 o'clock. We will start focusing on Cal tomorrow. All right? We will definitely break them down. We'll show you we'll talk stats, we'll talk matchups. We'll kind of put all of it into kind of 2 shows, all of our normal week into 2 shows. But we really felt it was important to do what we're doing now. So anyway, have a good one, everybody. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you for joining us on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.